My shoulder hit stone and my teeth tried to introduce themselves to each other. Priya landed next to me on one knee, still holding my hand, and the crossing sealed behind us with a sound like someone slamming a dictionary shut. For half a second, nothing happened. Then black letters punched through the wall like they had a personal grudge against architecture. The dragon's shadow fell across the city, and I don't even know what the city was supposed to do because Priya had already shoved me flat before the sentence finished its thought. The words didn't float politely like text in the blank. They cut. Shelves split along the path and spilled their contents everywhere. A brass mask whispered through broken teeth. A roll of film bled blue light. 3 books chained together at the spine went tumbling. The final word hit a pillar, and the stone turned into scale. A black plate burst out, broad as a shield and hot enough to smoke in the cold air. I stared at it. That wasn't in my chapter, which was becoming a theme. Priya shoved herself upright and told me to stay behind her. Her arms had changed. Several lines beneath her skin had gone dark, and the script that remained gathered around her wrists like it was running late and out of breath. The corridor stretched in both directions under a high arched ceiling. Shelves rose through several levels of iron walkways. Lamps drifted without chains, politely moving aside whenever someone passed beneath them. Far above, something enormous turned a page, and the sound rolled through the building like a low-grade earthquake with literary pretensions. I tried to stand. My right leg folded. I caught the base of a shelf before my face met the floor. My knee existed. My shin existed. Below that, my bare foot faded into a pale blur with no clear edge. Sensation ended halfway down my calf. I said Priya's name. She said she knew, which was the kind of answer you want to hear from your doctor, but not from someone standing in a corridor while sentences try to murder you. She threw a small metal frame on the floor. It unfolded into 2 brackets, each as tall as my waist. She pointed between them and told me to put my leg there. I asked why. She said so it remained my leg. I dragged myself into position. The brackets snapped together around my calf without touching it. Thin red threads crossed the gap, mapping the outline of my missing foot. Then pain returned all at once, like someone had left it running in the background and just now remembered to collect. I shouted and nearly kicked the device apart. Priya caught my ankle through the thread map and said pain was useful. I told her that was a terrible medical philosophy. She said it meant the anchor had found me. The sentence scraped across the ceiling. The city remembered, and a lamp burst, and darkness swallowed half the corridor. Priya pressed 2 fingers to the text beneath her wrist and called for help. Intake 9, live spill, unauthorized blank transit. She needed brackets, continuity line, and someone who could swing a weapon. A voice answered from her skin asking how unauthorized. She looked at me and said I had arrived without existing. There was a pause. Then the voice said understood, sending Dorian. She said send Mira. The voice said Dorian was closer. She said that was not the question. Metal rang at the far end of the corridor. A young man vaulted the rail of an upper walkway, dropped 15 feet with his coat flaring behind him, and landed with a blade of white light already forming in his hand. He took in the wrecked shelves, the scale growing from the pillar, Priya's damaged arms, and me sitting inside a bracket with one sock. His mouth tightened, and he asked if this was the emergency. The sentence lunged from the ceiling. He turned and cut through the word remembered. White light met black text. The impact shook dust from every shelf. The word split into writhing pieces. One fragment wrapped around his blade. Another darted for his face. He released the weapon before it reached him, and the light collapsed, taking the fragment with it. He said live syntax and asked if anyone had mentioned that. Priya said she said spill. He said she said unauthorized transit. She asked if he would have come slower. He said yes. Footsteps hammered along the upper walkway. A woman slid down a ladder, skipped the last 5 rungs, and landed beside Priya. Dark hair braided close to her head. A bone-white knife across her lower back that she did not draw. She went straight to me. Can you feel this? She pressed 2 fingers near my heel. Yes. This. She moved beyond the visible edge of my foot. No. Can you move your toes? I said I was currently unclear whether I owned any. She looked at Priya and said the anchor was holding the outline, but not restoring it. Priya said she knew. The woman asked if Priya had used her own script to force the crossing. Priya said there was no other door. The woman's eyes flicked over the dark lines in Priya's arms. She did not comment. She reached into a pouch and removed a nail made from folded paper. She told me her name was Mira, and she was going to put the nail through the shadow of my foot. I said that sentence contained several problems. She said it wouldn't touch me. I said that removed one. She drove the paper nail into the stone. The red threads tightened. My ankle jerked. My vanished toes curled somewhere I could not see. I asked through clenched teeth if this was useful pain. Mira glanced at Priya and said she says that when she doesn't want to admit something hurts. Priya's expression remained unchanged. Secure the patient. Mira said she was securing him. Priya said she was encouraging him. Mira said that wasn't possible because they had met 30 seconds ago. Another figure arrived at a run carrying a large spool of red cord under one arm and a pastry in his mouth. He stopped beside the damaged pillar. The growing scale reflected his face. He removed the pastry and asked if it was a new feature. Priya said continuity line. He said good morning to you too. The sentence moved under the floor. The stone beneath me darkened letter by letter. The city remembered my name. I felt the words before I read them. Pressure gathered behind my eyes. The corridor blurred. For an instant, I saw towers under a red sky, black wings passing over rooftops, crowds running through streets I had never properly described. A bell rang somewhere in the vision. The sound belonged to my abandoned novel. I said no. The floor split. A dragon's claw erupted between the brackets. It was unfinished. Bone showed through sections where scales had not been imagined. Black lines hung from each talon, waiting to become detail. Mira pulled me backward. The paper nail tore free. My fading legs stretched like wet paint. The claw closed around empty air. The man with the light blade, Dorian, summoned his weapon again and brought it down across the wrist. The cut didn't sever flesh. It severed the sentence supporting it. Letters burst across the corridor. The claw collapsed into loose punctuation. The man with the cord spat out a mouthful of pastry crumbs and introduced himself as Toby. He said he'd shake my hand, but the floor was writing monsters. He threw the spool to Mira, who caught it one-handed and looped the line around my waist. Toby said he was already emotionally attached to the left bracket. Mira told him to move. He moved. Dorian cut another fragment from the air and asked whose sentence this was. Nobody answered quickly enough. He looked at me. I said no. He asked if I had written it. I raised one hand and said in my defense it wasn't doing this when I wrote it. He asked how much. I said 6 words. The line beneath the floor darkened. 7, 8, 9. Priya saw me counting and asked if it was extending itself. I said yes, using my intended continuation. I said I didn't have one. The sentence struck the shelves again. This time it didn't break them. It read them. Every label along the corridor flashed black. The Empress of Salt. A child's map of the sun. The last machine in Eden. The Ember Sovereign. The sentence moved toward the titles, tasting each one through the ink. Priya's remaining arm script flared. She said do not let it enter a cannon. Dorian took the left aisle. Mira tightened the continuity line around me and anchored it to the brackets. Toby ran right, dragging the spool behind him. I asked what happens if it gets inside one. Toby hurdled a fallen shelf and said they find out why she shouted. The sentence split. One branch whipped toward the Empress of Salt. Dorian intercepted it, blade flashing through 2 words at once. The second raced for the last machine in Eden. Mira threw her bone-white knife. It pinned the text to the shelf an inch below the label. Black letters crawled around the blade, unable to cross it. The third branch disappeared. Priya turned. The Ember Sovereign. The object beneath that label was not a book. It was a thin leather folder sitting upright between a glass sphere and a coil of silver wire. Its cover rose and fell as though breathing. A black dash appeared across the leather. I knew it. The same length. The same angle. My unfinished mark. Priya crossed the distance and seized the folder. The cover bucked in her hands. She told them to bracket it. Dorian grabbed one side. Mira took the other. Toby wrapped continuity line around the folder 3 times and pulled until the leather creaked. I remained tethered 20 feet away. The folder opened. Wheat poured out. Golden stalks spread across the stone floor, growing to my waist in seconds. Warm wind filled the corridor. Somewhere beyond the impossible field, a young man screamed. The folder snapped shut. Every lamp overhead steadied. The stone scale crumbled from the pillar. My sentence vanished. The wheat remained. Then a fist struck the inside of the folder. Once. Twice. On the third impact, a voice came through the leather. You're late. the boy inside said. The old me is already climbing out. The folder bit Dorian when he tried to move it. Its leather edge split open and closed across his glove, sharp as teeth. He swore, jerked his hand free, and raised his light blade. Priya caught his wrist and said cutting an active cannon in half was discouraged. He said it attacked him. She said Toby does that too when hungry, and they still keep him around. Toby tightened the red line and said he felt valued. Wheat covered the corridor from wall to wall, bending beneath a wind from somewhere else, brushing against shelves that had never known sunlight. The voice inside the folder did not speak again. I remained trapped between the metal brackets while Mira examined my fading leg. The paper nail had restored an outline, but my skin below the knee looked washed out. I could see the floor faintly through my foot. Mira touched my ankle and asked about pressure. Yes. She touched 2 toes and asked which ones. I said I had options. She said that was better than no answer. Priya knelt across from me. The darkened lines in her arms had not returned. One functioning strand moved beneath her right wrist, stopping whenever it reached the places she had exhausted in the crossing. She said we needed to give me ink. I asked if that was blood. No. Soul? No. Experience points? She looked at me. I said sorry, dead fantasy writer, limited reference pool. She said it was the substance that allowed people and stories to retain definition here. I glanced at my transparent foot and said I had none. She said I had less than none according to 2 instruments, which should not be possible. Dorian stood over us and asked if we could discuss the impossible stranger after we stopped the cannon leaking agriculture into intake. Priya said no, my condition was tied to the breach. He said she didn't know that. She said she knew the sentence followed my signature. He said I didn't have one. Priya's gaze sharpened. Dorian folded his arms and said exactly. Mira stood and moved to the breathing folder. She told us to argue while working. She began cutting wheat away from its base with a short utility blade. Each severed stalk dissolved before touching the ground. Toby crouched beside her and asked if we thought the voice meant old as an elderly, previous draft, or disturbingly literal corpse. Mira said yes. Toby nodded and said strong option. Priya opened her coat and removed a narrow glass ampoule. Dark fluid moved inside, climbing the walls against gravity. She told me it was reserve ink, enough to give my body a stable local definition. I asked what it cost. She said the reserve. I said I meant me. Priya did not answer at once. Then she said it would hurt. I asked how much. She said she couldn't predict that. I said better. She said it might create a temporary sensory link to the person administering it. I asked if that meant another memory search. She said no, she could restrict the transfer to physical definition. I said her scan couldn't enter me. She said she had said it should not have been perceptible, but it still crossed a boundary I did not agree to. She was asking now. I looked at the ampoule and asked what happens if I say no. She said my leg continues fading and then the rest of me may follow. I said very balanced choice. She said no one promised me one. I held out my hand. Priya did not take it. She said say it. I said I agree to the ink transfer. She broke the ampoule against her palm. The dark fluid did not spill. It sank beneath her skin, joining the surviving lines in her arm. Priya placed 2 fingers against my sternum and told me to breathe. I said I'm dead. She said try anyway. I inhaled. Cold drove through my chest. The corridor vanished. For one instant, I felt Priya's body from inside. The ache in both forearms. The shallow burn across her right palm. The pressure she kept behind her eyes whenever too much information arrived at once. I felt a locked door. She held it shut from the other side. Then the connection narrowed. Ink entered me. It traced my ribs, spine, arms, and skull. When it reached my right knee, it hesitated. Pain followed. I screamed. My foot returned in pieces. Heel. Arched toes. Skin resolving around a structure already remembered by the brackets. Every nerve woke at once. Priya's hand trembled against my chest. The last bright line beneath her right wrist went dark. The transfer ended. I fell forward. Mira caught me under one arm before I struck Priya. She asked about my leg. I looked down. My foot had returned, though the color remained pale. A thin black line circled my ankle where the blank had reached deepest. I moved my toes. All 5 answered. I said still mine. Priya sat back against the shelf. Dorian looked at her arms and said she had emptied her field reserve. She said she used it. On me. Correct. He said we had an active cannon breach. She said also correct. He laughed once without humor and said excellent prioritization. Priya rose too fast and steadied herself against the shelf. I noticed. So did Mira. Neither spoke. The folder knocked again. This time the impact pushed the cover outward enough for gold light to escape. A word appeared on the leather. Elias. Everyone looked at me. I said I didn't do that. A second word formed. Vance. Dorian's blade returned. He told me to explain why a closed cannon knew my name. Priya approached the folder without touching it. The cover's original title had shifted. Under the Ember Sovereign, smaller letters wrote themselves in fresh black ink. Cast revision in progress. Toby leaned closer and said that felt discouraging. The line below it changed. Primary hero, Cale Arden. A second entry appeared. Unauthorized witness, Elias Vance. Then 3 more. Dorian Ashgrove. Mira Sato. Tobias Quill. Dorian stared at his name and said remove it. Priya said she didn't put it there. He said make it stop. The folder added one final line. Editorial contaminant, Priya Odiambo. Priya's face went still. Mira stepped beside her and asked if a cannon could assign roles to people outside it. Priya said no, and the answer came immediately. That frightened me. The wheat around our feet bent toward the folder. A scream ripped through the corridor. The sound repeated. Same pitch, same length, same abrupt ending. Again, again. The breathing cover bulged. A hand pressed from inside. Young, human, fingers spread against the leather. The boy said please. He couldn't hold the chapter closed. The folder's clasps broke. Golden light opened between us. Wheat rose in a wall. It struck Dorian first. The field wrapped around his waist and dragged him toward the folder. Mira caught his coat. Toby caught Mira. Their boots carved tracks through the wheat. Dorian drove his light blade into the stone floor. The weapon bent. I grabbed Toby's belt and pulled. My restored leg nearly buckled, but it held. Priya stepped into the wind. Her arms were empty of script. She couldn't force the folder closed, so she kicked the nearest bracket into its mouth. Metal caught between the covers. The pull weakened. Dorian tore free. The folder remained open 3 inches. Through the gap, I saw a village square frozen in late afternoon. A woman hung halfway through dropping a basket. A dog floated above the ground. At the center, a boy held a glowing sword while something with his face climbed from a stone well behind him. The boy looked through the opening. His eyes found me. He said I wrote this wrong. The bracket snapped. The folder opened all the way. Crossing into the canon felt like being read by something impatient. The folder pulled me apart into details. Age, height, dead or alive, unresolved. Occupation, failed writer. Narrative relevance, pending. That last judgment stung more than it should have. Then the canon put me back together badly. I landed on a tiled roof. My restored foot went through the thatch. I dropped waist deep into someone's attic while the rest of the team scattered across the village below. Dorian struck the market square in a crouch, light blade carving a bright line through the dust. Mira landed on a cart and rolled with the impact. Toby appeared in a chicken enclosure. The chickens objected more efficiently than he did. Priya landed upright beside the well. She swayed once. The golden sky pressed down over tiled roofs, wheat fields, and a distant line of blue mountains. Everything looked too deliberate. Every chimney released the same amount of smoke. Every tree held its branches at a flattering angle. A bell rang from the village chapel. The world jumped backward 3 seconds. The woman in the square lifted her fallen basket. A pear rose from the dust and returned to her hand. The dog dropped to the ground, leapt again, and remained suspended beneath a startled bird. Toby backed out of the chicken enclosure. The chickens flew backward around him and returned to where they had begun. He said no. The bell rang. Everything reset. He said no again, in exactly the same place. The bell rang. Everything reset. He started to say no a 3rd time, but Mira caught him by the collar before the loop completed and hauled him across the street. This time, when the bell rang, Toby remained beside her. The chickens repeated without him. He stared at them and said he had escaped poultry. She said, "You're welcome." I pulled myself from the roof and slid down the thatch. My damaged leg hit the ground first. Pain flashed around the black line at my ankle. The loop reset. My pain did not. Priya noticed me limping and said I should have stayed outside. I said the folder disagreed. She said that didn't make it correct. Dorian approached the well, blade ready. The boy from the glimpse stood on the opposite side. 16, perhaps. Homespun shirt, worn boots, glowing sword. He had the clean, marketable face of a hero an illustrator could draw quickly. He also looked exhausted. He said we came through. Dorian aimed the blade at him and asked his name. Isekai'd. The Ember Sovereign? Not yet. The bell rang. The basket lifted. The dog leapt. Kill did not reset. Neither did the well. Stone groaned beneath its rim. Priya moved closer and asked how long the loop had been active. Kill frowned and asked which time. The current repetition. 2 days. Toby looked at the sun and asked if it had been afternoon for 2 days. Kale said it used to reach sunset, but then the chapter shortened. The bell rang. A child laughed beside the fountain. The laugh cut off at the same note. Again. Again. I looked around the square. The villagers' eyes moved during the loop. Their bodies repeated, but their eyes followed us. I said Priya's name. She said she saw it. I asked what they remember. She said she couldn't read the entire village. Dorian glanced at her and said since when. She said since now. His mouth opened. Mira stepped between the argument and the well and asked Kale what climbs out. The boy's grip tightened on his sword. A mistake. Mira said that wasn't an answer. He said it was the one he had. The stones inside the well shifted. A second hand appeared beneath the rim. It wore Kale's glove. I took 1 step forward. Priya blocked me with her arm and said no. I said I only wanted to see. She said I nearly vanished following a sentence because I wanted to hear how it ended. I said that was a misleading summary. She said it was an accurate one. Kale looked between us and asked if we were editors. Priya said some of us. Dorian cut in and said we came to remove the contamination. Kale's expression changed. He asked which contamination. Dorian pointed at the well. Kale raised his sword. Myra's hand moved to her knife. Toby stopped smiling. The bell rang. Every villager turned their head. The movement did not belong to the loop. The woman released her basket. It struck the ground for the first time. Pairs rolled across the square. One stopped against my boot. The woman's mouth opened. Her face blurred from the nose downward. Wet ink dragged across unfinished paper. All around the square, villagers broke from their repeated actions. The child beside the fountain climbed onto its rim with joints bending in the wrong order. The baker stepped through his own stall. The dog landed, split along its shadow, and became 2 flat shapes running across the walls. Dorian moved and said back to the crossing. Priya said there was no crossing. He looked toward the field where we had arrived. Nothing marked it. Kale stared at the villagers closing around us and said this wasn't supposed to happen until chapter 9. I asked what chapter we were in. Kale's eyes met mine. 4. The well burst. A second Kale climbed out. This one looked older by no more than a year and worn by decades. His glowing sword gave off gray light. Whole sections of his face lacked detail. He stepped onto the square. The blurred villagers stopped. The old Kale looked at the boy holding his place in the story. He said, "You get my chapters." The bell rang. The loop tried to reset. The old Kale swung his sword. He cut the sound in half. The severed bell note hit the square as a physical wave. Roof tiles lifted. Windows shattered inward. I left the ground and struck the fountain hard enough to empty my lungs. Water splashed over me, warm from a sun that had been trapped above the village for 2 days. Dorian landed on his feet. Of course he did. The blurred baker reached him first. Dorian's blade passed through the creature's chest in one clean stroke. Both halves kept moving. He ducked beneath grasping arms, turned, and cut through the creature's shadow instead. The baker collapsed. He shouted shadows, cut the shadows. Mira was already doing it. Her bone-white knife pinned the market woman's shadow to the ground. The woman froze with one blurred hand inches from Toby's face. Toby looked at the knife, then at Mira, and said he had a plan. She said he was leaning backward. He said it was an early stage. A child shape crawled over the fountain rim toward me. Its face still held its original eyes. They were crying. I hesitated. The shape lunged. Priya struck it across the side of the head with one of the metal brackets. Its shadow broke against the stone. The body scattered into loose lines of description. She said, "Move." I pushed myself upright. My ankle burned. The black ring around it had widened by a fraction. Priya saw that too. She did not stop to examine it. The old Kale walked toward the current one while the fight broke around them. Gray light trailed from his sword, stripping color from every surface it passed. Current Kale raised his gold blade and said the old one should be dead. The old Kale said he was replaced. You attacked the village. I remembered it. Their swords met. Gold and gray split the square from well to chapel. The impact ripped every remaining pair from the ground and drove them into the nearest wall. For one sharp instant, both heroes stood outlined against each other, the boy the cannon had kept and the boy it had buried. Then the old Kale twisted. His gray blade slid along the gold one and cut through the younger hero's sleeve. No blood appeared. The skin beneath turned blank. Kale staggered back. Dorian saw it and said that was erasure. Priya's attention tightened on the wound. Localized. For now. I looked at the well. More faces moved below. Not one. Many. Copies overlapping in darkness. Boys older, younger, wounded in different places. A Kale with no sword. A Kale wearing a crown. A Kale who had gone gray from head to foot and still watched. The old version noticed me watching. Recognition crossed his unfinished face. He said you. My stomach dropped. I said we hadn't met. He said I was in the sentence. Priya turned toward me and asked what sentence. The old Kale moved. Dorian intercepted. Gray and white blades struck with a crack that split the well's upper stones. Dorian held the first blow, boots sliding backward through dust. He was stronger than I had assumed. Not just skilled. Fast enough to read the second strike before it began. Dorian released his blade, let the old Kale's weapon pass through empty light, then formed a new one in his other hand and drove it toward the gray hero's ribs. The point stopped against skin. The old Kale smiled. He said, you still think I have the body they gave me. His torso opened like a page. Dorian's blade entered empty margins. Gray hands closed around his wrist. Mira threw her knife. The old Kale released Dorian to avoid it. The blade passed his cheek and pinned the shadow behind him. For half a second he froze. Mira said now. Current Kale struck. Gold light tore across his predecessor's chest and hurled him through the market stall. Wood exploded. The blurred villagers shuddered as one. Toby climbed onto the fountain. I asked what he was doing. He said, improvising past the leaning stage. He grabbed the chapel bell rope where it crossed the square beneath a wooden arch. The rope should not have extended that far. The loop had dragged it through the village. Toby wrapped it around both hands and pulled. The bell rang. The village reset. Broken windows repaired. Tiles flew back onto roofs. The market stall rebuilt itself around the old Kale, trapping him inside newly restored beams. Dorian stared at Toby and asked if that was his plan. Toby said recent draft. The loop continued. The basket returned to the woman's hands. The blurred villagers snapped back into their original positions. Old Kale remained imprisoned. Mira said the loop affected the environment, but not us. Priya said, or anything the canon considered central. Current Kale looked toward the well. The faces below had moved higher. The reset restored the stones his predecessor had broken. It did not force the buried versions downward. I saw the problem. I said every loop gives them another attempt. Priya nodded and said Toby had just triggered one manually. Toby released the rope and said revision. Plan had drawbacks. The market stall burst apart. Old Kale came through it under a storm of timber, gray swords sweeping low. Mira shoved Toby from the fountain. The blade missed his legs by inches. Dorian attacked from the side. Current Kale struck from the other. The old version caught both blades. Gray light spread along them. Dorian's weapon began losing definition at the tip. Current Kale's gold dimmed. Priya shouted, let go. Current Kale obeyed. Dorian did not. He forced more light into his sword, jaw clenched, and said he could break him. Priya said he didn't know what he was. He said he knew where he was standing. The old Kale looked almost pleased. He pulled. Dorian stumbled within reach. And I ran. I did not have a weapon. I did not have a plan. I had a bad ankle and an instinct that had caused nearly every problem since my death. I placed myself between them anyway. The gray blade stopped beside my throat. Dorian stared at my back and asked what I was doing. I looked at the old hero and asked why he said I was in the sentence. Priya's voice cut across the square. Elias, step away. The old Kale studied me. Up close, his unfinished face changed whenever I blinked. Farm boy, king, corpse, stranger. He said I left the shadow unfinished. I said I didn't write him. He said no, I wrote the opening. I heard my own sentence from the blank. The dragon's shadow fell across the city, and the city remembered his name. I asked what city. The old hero's expression twisted. Behind him, the well cracked. He said the one beneath mine. I looked past him. The darkness below the well had changed. For a single moment, it was not a shaft beneath a village. It was a sky. Far below, upside down, Black wings passed over towers burning red. My abandoned city. The sight vanished. Old Kale raised his sword and said I opened the wrong story. I should have moved. I thought of the boy in front of me, buried beneath his own replacement. I thought of 31 chapters ending without a dragon. I thought I understood the shape of the grief. That was my mistake. I said I know what it's like to be unfinished. The old Kale's face went blank. He said no, I know what it's like to leave. He drove the gray blade through my chest. Dorian struck me from the side. The impact knocked me clear before the sword completed its path. Gray light missed my heart. It caught Dorian's forearm. The blade passed through skin without resistance. Dorian made no sound. He landed on one knee, staring at his right arm. Color drained from his fingertips. The gray spread past his wrist. Mira reached him first and said his name. He said he couldn't feel it. Priya dropped beside him and seized his elbow. Her empty arm script searched for a response that was no longer there. The old Kale stepped toward me. Current Kale blocked him, gold sword shaking in both hands. Around the well, more fingers closed over the rim. Dozens. The buried heroes began to climb. Dorian looked up from his widening arm. His expression held no gratitude, only fury. He said to me, "You wanted to understand him, now help me keep my hand." His little finger vanished at the first knuckle. No blood followed. The gray simply advanced, taking color, warmth, and shape as it crossed his hand. Mira caught his wrist before he could hide it and told him to spread his fingers. He said he was. Only 3 moved. Priya dropped beside them. Her depleted arm script crawled toward the injury and stopped several inches above the skin, unable to read further. She asked Kale for his sword. The current hero stared at her and said he can't use it. She said he doesn't need to use it. Old Kale crossed the square behind them, keeping his gray blade low while the buried versions pulled themselves over the well's broken rim. One had no face. Another wore a rusted crown. A third crawled with both legs missing, dragging a sword that changed shape every few feet. Dorian tried to stand. Mira shoved him back down and said if the gray reached his elbow, she takes the arm. He looked at her and asked with what. She drew the bone-white knife. Dorian stopped moving. I knelt on his other side and said there had to be another way. Mira said there might not be. She did not look at me. Kale approached with the glowing sword held across his body and asked what to do. Priya pointed to Dorian's failing hand and said give him the weapon. Dorian laughed through his teeth and said absolutely not. Priya said the cannon restores objects attached to its protagonist whenever the bell resets. Clothing. Injuries the chapter has not authorized. The sword. Dorian said he was not its protagonist. She said no, the sword was. Kale's face tightened and said that isn't how it works. Priya said he can see chapter numbers, he tells her. The buried versions advanced. Dorian's ring finger blurred. Priya held out her hand to Kale and said now. He turned the hilt toward Dorian. Dorian did not take it. The light pouring from the blade reflected in his gray fingertips. He said he doesn't borrow another man's weapon. Mira placed her knife against the inside of his elbow and said choose quickly. Dorian glared at her. She did not blink. He seized Kale's sword. Gold light ran down his wrist. The gray stopped, only for a breath. Then it pushed against the gold and continued. Priya turned toward the chapel and shouted for Toby. They needed a reset. Toby stood beneath the stretched bell rope, surrounded by 3 blurred villagers whose shadows crawled toward his feet. He said he loved a plan with 1 word. Priya said ring it when she says. He said then use more words before that. A buried Kale lunged at him. Toby ducked. The gray blade passed through the rope arch and took a clean slice from the wooden post. He backed toward the fountain, speaking loudly enough for the entire square. Attention, everyone. This village is now participating in an unscheduled emergency festival. Activities include screaming, fleeing, and not touching the dead farm boys. The child shape on the fountain turned toward him. So did the other blurred villagers. Toby kept talking. Prizes would be awarded for fastest evacuation and least horrifying use of joints. I said they were following his voice. He said of course they are, he's delightful. The humor never reached Toby's eyes. He was pulling the villagers away from Dorian. Mira noticed. She shifted her body between Toby and the nearest buried version without thanking him. Priya gripped Dorian's shoulder and said when the bell rings, hold the sword with both hands. He said his right hand doesn't work. She said make the cannon believe it does. He asked if that was the treatment. She said that was the treatment available. Dorian looked at me and said if this fails he's blaming me until the arm is gone. I said he can blame me after. He said he was starting now. Current Kale faced the well. Without his sword he looked younger, smaller. The gold light that had made the village bend around him was gone. Old Kale saw it and said he gave it away. Kale said he needs it. He said he isn't part of the story. The words struck the square. The wheat around Dorian's knees flattened. Black letters appeared above him. Side character, unconfirmed. The canon had heard. Priya's head snapped toward the text and told Kale to include him. He asked how. She said make a decision that cannot happen without him. Old Kale charged. Kale had no weapon. Dorian forced his numb right hand around the golden hilt and tried to rise. His knee buckled. I moved to help. Mira blocked me with one shoulder and said I touched the last fight and made it worse. I said he can't stand. She said then let him decide what he can do. Dorian heard her. He planted Kale's sword point first into the ground and hauled himself upright with his left hand. His right remained wrapped around the hilt by stubbornness and little else. Kale backed toward him. Old Kale raised the gray blade. Kale looked at Dorian once and asked if he could block him. Dorian's answer came fast. Yes. It was probably a lie. Kale nodded and said then I need you. The text above Dorian changed. Ally of the Sovereign. Gold light burst through his hand. Every missing edge returned at once. Dorian screamed. Priya shouted Toby's name. Toby caught the bell rope with both hands and threw his full weight backward. The chapel bell rang. The world snapped. Pears flew from the wall to the ground, then rose into the woman's basket. Broken timber rebuilt the market stall. Roof tiles crossed the sky. The villagers returned to their opening positions. Dorian remained standing with both hands around the sword. The canon read him as part of Kale's scene. His fingers returned. They were gray. All 5 existed, but the skin from fingertip to mid-forearm had the pale, flat color of unprinted paper. Fine cracks ran across his palm. His grip trembled. Dorian looked down. Mira asked if he could feel them. He pressed his thumb against his first finger. Nothing. She said his name. He said he knew they were touching. She said that wasn't the question. He said no. The bell's note faded. The gold sword flickered. Dorian's right hand opened on its own. The weapon slipped. Kale caught it before it struck the ground. The reset had restored the limb's outline. It had not restored what the old blade removed. Old Kale emerged from the rebuilt market stall. The loop had repaired his prison around him and released him in the same instant. He looked at Dorian's gray arm without satisfaction and said that is what they do. They keep the part the chapter needs. Dorian formed a white light blade in his damaged hand. The weapon appeared crooked. Its edge broke into sparks. He tried again. Nothing formed. His face changed. Old Kale attacked. Current Kale met him with gold. The impact drove both men toward the well. More buried hands closed around the younger hero's ankles. Kale slashed downward, severing fingers and shadows. There were too many. A crown version caught his sword arm. Another seized his collar. Kale shouted Dorian's name. Dorian lifted his useless right hand. No blade came. Mira threw her knife. It pinned the crown version's shadow, but the others kept pulling. Kale disappeared to the waist. I ran forward. Priya caught my coat and said witnesses do not enter discarded scenes. I said she doesn't know that. She said she knows the canon named me for a reason. Kale's fingers scraped across the stone rim. Old Kale stood over him. For a moment I thought he would help. Then Old Kale brought his gray sword down across the gold blade. The protagonist weapon broke. Every lamp of afternoon sunlight in the village went out. Kale fell into the well. The buried versions followed him down. Old Kale looked at me across the sudden dark and said now there is no current hero. Above the village, black text began rewriting the cast list. Priya jumped into the well before I could stop her. One moment she stood beside me with both arms nearly emptied of script. The next, she planted a boot on the broken rim and dropped into the dark after Kale. I caught the back of her coat. The fabric tore through my fingers. I shouted her name. Her voice rose from below and told me to stay where the canon could see me. Then she was gone. Dorian reached the well and looked down. His gray hand hung at his side. He tried to close it. 2 fingers answered late. He asked me if I let her go. I said I didn't let. He said we're both excellent at decisions. Mira retrieved her knife from the pinned shadow and started giving orders. Toby Bell. Dorian, watch the square. Elias, don't move. I said that last one seemed targeted. She said it was. The village had lost its hero and did not know what to do with the empty role. The sky flickered between afternoon and an unlit draft. Houses lost windows, regained them, then replaced them with doors opening several feet above the ground. Villagers repeated half-actions and stopped. The woman with the basket picked up a pear and said help. The loop dragged the word back into her mouth. She tried again. Help. It vanished. Her eyes remained fixed on me. Unauthorized witness. The roll appeared above me in black letters, visible only when I looked away from it. Each time I watched the woman struggle, the cannon held her new action longer. I understood. My attention was giving contradictions permission to remain. Mira said my name. The child beside the fountain had climbed down. It was moving toward me outside the loop. She told me to stop looking at them. I said if I stop, they reset. She said if I keep going, everything I notice becomes part of the chapter. The child's blurred mouth cleared and said please. Mira stepped between us. The face smeared again. I grabbed her shoulder and asked what she was doing. She said keeping me from adopting a village while it collapses. I said they're awake. She said so are the things under the well. I said that doesn't mean we leave them trapped in a loop. She said no, it means we survive long enough to change one problem at a time. Her voice stayed level. Her knuckles around the knife did not. I released her. Mira had drawn a line I couldn't argue around. That made me resent her for several seconds. Below us, Priya fell through discarded chapters. The well had no stone walls after the first 20 feet. Panels of broken scenes surrounded her, stacked at impossible angles. Kale running from wolves. Kale receiving his sword from a dying knight. Kale kissing a princess whose face had been revised blank. Kale dying beneath a wyvern. Kale defeating it. Kale becoming king. Kale never leaving the farm. Each scene held a different boy. Numbers burned at the corners. Chapter 2. Chapter 6. Chapter 19. Chapter 1. Revised. Priya caught the edge of a broken scene and swung herself onto it. Pain shot through her darkened forearms. Current Kale hung below, one hand gripping a strip of narrative gutter. Old Kale stood several yards away on the underside of another page. Gravity had given up pretending to be singular. She said you knew he would fall. Old Kale looked at her and said he knew the chapter would choose an absence. She asked why he can see the numbers. He said because they kept replacing him without cleaning the seams. Current Kale pulled himself higher and explained that every time the story restarted, he woke with a piece left over. A title, a page count, sometimes a death that hadn't happened to him yet. Priya asked how many rewrites. The boys below answered from the dark. 7, 14, 3, 201. Their voices overlapped. Current Kale shut his eyes and said he stopped counting when the numbers disagreed. Priya looked deeper. At the bottom of the well, red light burned beneath an upside-down skyline. My Dragon City. It was incomplete. Towers ended in sketch lines. Streets turned into paragraphs halfway across intersections. A black wing crossed the sky, but never resolved into the creature carrying it. Discarded Kales climbed toward it. Each one lost detail as they approached. Their clothes darkened into armor I might have written. Their swords lengthened, curved, became the weapons of another story. The city was not offering refuge. It was filling empty roles. Old Kale watched Priya understand and said at least it needs them. She said it was consuming them. He said so did this place. She said the city has no finished structure and was using their discarded material to continue itself. He said, and her organization uses ink. Priya did not answer. The comparison had enough truth to be dangerous. Current Kale looked down at the red streets and asked what happens if they reach it. She said they become part of my sentence. He asked if they can come back. She said she didn't know. Old Kale laughed and said she says that as if staying here is better. A line of black text stretched from the city to the well's inner wall. My sentence had become a bridge. Priya touched it. Her roll burned across her skin. Editorial contaminant. The sentence recoiled from her hand. The canon considered her foreign material. That made her one of the few things capable of damaging the connection. My voice echoed from far above. Priya. She could cut it. Doing so would stop the city from drawing discarded drafts out of the well. It would also remove the only new route they had. Current Kale read the decision on her face and said wait. Old Kale raised his gray sword and said if she cuts it, they remain under the chapter. Priya said if she doesn't, none of them remain themselves. He said that should be their choice. She said there are dozens of them climbing toward a place that is changing them before they arrive. He said still their choice. Priya looked at the city. One discarded Kale had reached the nearest street. He turned. His farm clothes had become black armor. Scales grew along his throat. When he opened his mouth, my unfinished sentence came out. Priya wrapped both hands around the bridge. Current Kale grabbed her wrist and said find another way. Her remaining arm script went dark beneath his fingers. She said there isn't time. He said she doesn't know that. She said no. She pulled anyway. The sentence stretched. Old Kale crossed the broken scenes in a gray blur. Current Kale released Priya and intercepted him barehanded. The sword cut across his ribs, turning a strip of skin blank. Priya tore the bridge in half. The Dragon City dropped. It did not fall through distance. It withdrew through unfinished detail, red towers narrowing into lines, lines into letters, letters into a single black dash. The discarded Kales nearest it screamed as their borrowed armor peeled away. Several came apart with it. Others fell back into the well. Old Kale stared at the empty place where the city had been. Priya held the severed half-sentence in both hands. He said, "You stranded us." She said yes. Above, the village loop restarted without a bell. Every broken chapter folded inward. Current Kale slipped. Old Kale caught him by the wrist. For a moment they hung together over the collapsing dark. Then black text appeared across Priya's arms. Contaminant identified. Correction in progress. The well began erasing her first. Priya's left hand disappeared from my sight before the rest of her reached the surface. I saw it through the well as a pale gap moving upward between broken scenes. I shouted, "Pull her out." Dorian dropped to one knee and caught Priya's wrist with his left hand as she came within reach. His gray right arm struck the rim and folded beneath him without feeling the impact. I grabbed her coat. Mira caught me around the waist. Toby locked both arms around Mira and braced his feet against the chapel steps. He said, "Everyone pull on 3. Dorian looked over his shoulder and asked why 3. Toby said because people panic less when given numbers. 1, 2. The well dragged us forward. 3. We hauled Priya into the square. She hit the ground hard. Her left hand returned as soon as it crossed the rim, but black letters crawled beneath the skin. Correction pending. I reached for her. Priya slapped my hand away and said the city link is severed. I said she went alone. Yes. She could have been erased. Yes. I asked if that's all. She said for now. The well collapsed beneath Old and Current Kale. Both struck the inner wall and caught separate stones. Dozens of prior versions fell past them into darkness that no longer led anywhere. Without the Dragon City, the discard pit had begun closing. The cannon was compressing everything it could not use. Old Kale looked toward the surface and said you took the only exit. Priya pushed herself onto one knee and said it was rewriting him. He said she decided that mattered more than consent. She said yes. No defense followed. Old Kale's unfinished face sharpened with hatred. The well narrowed. Current Kale's fingers slipped. Dorian looked at his damaged hand, then at the broken hero sword lying beside the rim. He said they needed another reset. Toby was already at the rope. He said the bell was pulling itself back. The rope shortened as we watched, retreating toward the chapel in jerks. The cannon was removing access to the loop now that its protagonist was absent. Mira ran. She vaulted the fountain, caught the rope's frayed end, and wrapped it around her forearm. The bell dragged her across the square. Toby caught her belt. He said, "Please tell him this is symbolic and not heavy." She said, "Pull." He pulled. The chapel doors slammed open. Inside, rows of villagers sat in pews facing a blank wall. They repeated the same prayer without sound. The bell rope ran through the center aisle and up into darkness. The blurred villagers in the square turned toward Mira. Their shadows spread. I saw the loop's anchor. It was no longer the bell. It was the village's expectation that Kale would save them. Without him, the same moment could not advance. I said Kale has to return before the reset. Mira strained against the rope and said useful. I said the cannon needs him in place. She said more useful if he weren't in a hole. Old Kale climbed first. He drove his gray sword into the stones and pulled himself upward. Current Kale followed below, one hand pressed to his blank ribs. More versions clung to him. A child Kale held his ankle. A crowned Kale gripped the child. The whole chain rose. The well narrowed another foot. There was no room for all of them. I moved toward the rim. Mira shouted from across the square and told me to stop. I said they're almost here. She said every extra body keeps the well open. I said we can't cut them loose. She said she can. The bone-white knife remained in her hand. I stared at her. Myra's face was pale from holding the rope. Her voice stayed steady. She said she would give them one attempt. When the bell moves, she cuts whatever is still below the rim. I said that kills them. She said it stops them from taking the village with them. I said she doesn't know that. She said no, she knows the well is widening every time another version climbs. Priya looked at the shadows around the rim and said Mira is right. I turned on her and said she already stranded them. She said that doesn't obligate us to sacrifice everyone above. Dorian forced himself upright. His right arm hung dead. He said argue later. He picked up half of Kale's broken gold sword with his left hand. A white blade formed around the fragment, unstable but present. He stood beside the well and asked what I need. I looked at the cast text flickering above us. Unauthorized witness. The roll did not let me change the chapter. It let me confirm what the chapter could not decide. I watched the versions climbing. Each one carried a different claim to being Isekai'd. The canon couldn't hold them together because it had built itself around one protagonist. But the loop did not reset people. It reset positions. I called to Toby and asked if he could ring the bell without completing the pull. He said that depends how strongly we believe in his upper body strength. I said make it sound once. Short. Toby understood the tone. The joke had done its work. It kept his breathing even and Myra's hands steady. He said short he can do. I turned to current Kale and said when the bell rings, the cannon will put its hero back at the center of the square. Kale looked at the buried versions attached to him and asked which one. I said that's what it can't decide. Old Kale climbed within reach and asked what I was proposing. I said I witnessed one choice. He asked if it was mine. I said no his. Current Kale looked at me. I stepped back from the rim and asked what he wants the next chapter to call him. Kale looked down at the versions clinging to his body. The child at his ankle. The king below him. The half-finished boys disappearing into the narrowing dark. He did not answer quickly. The well crushed inward another inch. Then Kale pulled the child version upward and placed the boy's hand on a stone ledge. He said he's Isekai'd, and they were too. The canon hesitated. I watched. The statement remained. I did not add to it. Old Kale looked at the current boy for a long moment and said that will not save them. I said no. He said I'll keep the chapters they gave me. I said if I live. He asked what they get. Kale's grip shook and said a name in them. Old Kale almost laughed. Then the crown version below lost his hold. He fell, taking 3 others with him. The sound continued after the darkness swallowed them. Mira raised her knife and said time. Old Kale looked down. Dozens remained. Too many. He climbed over the rim and turned back toward them. Current Kale reached for him and asked what he was doing. He said choosing which mistake belongs to him. Old Kale drove his gray sword across the inner wall. The blade cut every reaching shadow at once. The buried versions fell. Some screamed his name. Some called him traitor. Some thanked him. He remained on the wrong side of the blade, braced against the collapsing wall. Current Kale seized his arm. Old Kale struck his hand away and said he wanted them remembered. Kale said he meant all of them. He said that is why he is still a child. The well began closing around his shoulders. He looked at me and said I was right about one thing. I waited. He said I did leave something unfinished, and it learned to look for replacements. He brought the weapon down. The last supporting stone broke. Priya shouted Toby's name. Toby hauled the rope. The bell gave one cracked note. The village reset. Current Kale vanished from the rim and reappeared at the center of the square on both knees. The blurred villagers snapped back into place. The well restored itself. Its stones returned. Its opening sealed. Old Kale did not emerge. Neither did the others. Myra's knife struck solid stone where the well's shadow had been. The loop completed. Sunset arrived. For the first time in 2 days, the sun moved. Every villager in the square fell down screaming. Their bodies remembered every reset at once. Toby released the rope and ran toward the nearest child. Mira went to the basket woman. Dorian remained by the sealed well, broken sword in hand. Priya looked at me and said I stabilized Kale's choice. I said he made it. She said I made the canon accept it. I said as a witness. She said do not pretend that is nothing. Before I could answer, Kale made a choking sound. Black smoke poured from his mouth. He unfolded a strip of paper from beneath his tongue. The page was written in my handwriting. At the top, beneath a title I had never typed, was a chapter number. Kale refused to hand over the page until I stopped asking. He sat against the sealed well with a blanket around his shoulders while villagers cried, vomited, or stared at familiar buildings as though seeing them after years away. The basket woman had broken 3 fingers during a loop she could now remember. The child from the fountain no longer cast a human shadow. It crouched beside him in the shape of a dog. Mira moved through the square checking breathing, pupils, and broken bones. She did not tell anyone they were safe. Toby stood on the fountain rim and gave the villagers instructions one street at a time. Blue doors, go to the chapel. Red roofs, stay where you are unless your house is currently on fire. If your house has changed color, congratulations, you're with me. The absurdity gave frightened people something simple to follow. His voice shook only when he stopped speaking. Dorian sat alone beside the ruined market stall. His right forearm remained gray from fingertips to just below the elbow. The hand rested palm up on his knee. He watched the fingers as if waiting for them to confess. I approached. He saw me and looked away. I said, "I'm sorry." He said no. I stopped. I said I wasn't asking him to. He said he knows what apologies sound like. Dorian attempted to close his fist. The first 2 fingers moved. The others remained open. He said I stepped between him and an erasure blade because I wanted to talk. I said yes. He said I didn't know what he could do. No. I didn't know whether he wanted help. No. And he moved because if he didn't, it went through my chest. I had no useful answer. Dorian looked at me then. His anger had survived the victory intact. He asked if I know what he hates most. I waited. He said he would do it again. That was not forgiveness. His mouth twisted. He said because he knows how to react when someone is about to die. I apparently need a committee. He stood. His right hand remained limp. I moved aside. He passed without touching me. Priya watched from near the well. She had recovered 2 faint lines of arm script. Both moved unevenly. I said she should have waited. She asked if I meant for permission to cut the bridge. I said for help. She asked from the unauthorized witness who stabilizes whatever he looks at. I said she didn't know that before jumping. She said she knew the cannon had marked her as contamination, which gave her access. I said it also tried to erase her. She said she accounted for the risk. I said no, she accepted it. Her eyes narrowed. She said those are sometimes the same. I said they shouldn't be. She said that is not my decision. The argument stopped there. Neither reached for a softer version. Kale unfolded the page again. The paper smelled faintly of my apartment. Burnt coffee, dust from the radiator, cheap detergent. I crouched beside the boy and asked if I could. He held the page tighter and said I keep saying that word now. I said yes. He said I didn't before. I said no. He considered me. Then he handed it over. I knew the handwriting. I also knew I had not written the words. The dragon's shadow fell across the city, and the city remembered his name. The next paragraph described a bell ringing beneath the streets. The sound opened wells and other stories. From those wells, abandoned heroes climbed into the dragon's city and took the places of soldiers who had never been written. The passage ended halfway down the page. No dragon appeared. Priya read over my shoulder without touching the paper and said the sentence used the discard pit as material. I asked if the city is real. She said something answered my unfinished draft. That is all we know. Kale looked at the sealed well and asked if cutting the bridge destroyed it. I studied the page. A smear of red ink moved beneath the final line. I said no. Priya glanced at me and said I cannot know that. I said the chapter continued after the bridge was cut. She said on paper produced by a damaged cannon. Kale said I'm right. Priya looked at him. The boy tapped the chapter number and said 32 was not there when he swallowed it. I asked when he swallowed it. He said he didn't. He remembered doing it after the reset. His face tightened. He said that happens now. He remembers actions from versions that didn't remain. Priya crouched in front of him and asked how many. He said 6 since sunset. She asked if he can tell which belonged to him. He said not every time. The cost of the rewrite had stayed inside him. Kale was current. He was also carrying debris from the people sealed below. Mira joined us and said we need to leave before the canon assigns us another scene. Kale looked up and asked if we're leaving. She said we have injured people. He said so do they. Mira glanced across the square. The village healer was setting fingers with strips torn from a curtain. 2 farmers carried an unconscious man toward the chapel. The baker, face restored, organized water buckets. She said they have people. Kale's expression hardened and said that sounds convenient. She said it is. Mira did not apologize for the answer. She said they can send supplies and a team that isn't part of the cast. If we stay, the cannon keeps riding around us. I folded the page. Kale reached for it. I said this stays with me. He said it came from my story. I said it came out of his body. My fingers tightened. Then I released it. Kale took the page back. A small decision. Harder than it should have been. Priya noticed. She said nothing. The crossing did not open easily. With her reserves depleted, Priya could only reactivate the folder from inside the cannon. Kale placed the broken halves of his sword across the sealed well. Toby tied the chapel rope around them. Dorian held the line with his left hand while Mira directed villagers away from the square. Priya pressed both darkened forearms against the folder's cast mark, now burned into the air above the well. Editorial contaminant. The cannon resisted her. The word tightened around her wrists. I stepped closer. Priya looked at me and said witness only. I nodded. She forced the opening. The margins appeared through a narrow vertical seam. Mira crossed first to secure the other side. Toby followed backward, still addressing the villagers until the seam cut off his voice. Dorian approached next. Kale offered him the remaining half of the gold sword and said he used it. Dorian looked at his gray hand and said he dropped it. Kale said he held it first. Dorian took the fragment with his left hand. Kale said make another. Dorian said he didn't know if he could. Kale said then learn. He crossed. I remained with Priya. Kale stood beside the well, blanket around his shoulders, page hidden beneath it. He asked what to call the others. I looked at the sealed stones. I thought of old Kale's face as the well closed. I said I don't know. Kale nodded once. It was the first answer I had given him that the boy seemed to trust. I crossed into the margins. Priya followed last. The seam sealed behind us. Dorian made it 12 steps down the intake corridor before the gray hand failed completely. Kale's sword fragment fell from his left grip when he turned, but his damaged right arm was the one he stared at. A medic ran toward him. Dorian raised his good hand and said, "Don't touch me." His gray fingers were moving. Slowly, one after another, they formed the grip used to hold a light blade. No weapon appeared. The hand completed the motion anyway. Then the gray spread another inch toward his elbow. Dorian's arm began disappearing again before the medic touched him. The gray crossed his elbow in a thin tide. Skin lost its pores. The dark hairs along his forearm flattened into pale marks, then vanished altogether. The medic said frame. Two assistants wheeled a metal arch over the treatment cot. Rings descended around Dorian's shoulder, elbow, wrist, and fingers. He tried to pull away. Mira put her good hand against his chest and told him to stay down. He said he is down. She said stay there better. The ring around his elbow flashed red. A line of gray appeared above it. The lead medic's face tightened and said it was using the joint as a continuation point. I asked what that means. She said it hasn't decided the forearm ends at the forearm. Dorian asked if she can stop it. She said they can try. He said then stop narrating. The emergency ward had been built for injuries that normal rooms could not survive. Brass braces ran through the walls. An instrument faded when the medic brought it near Dorian's hand, its silver tip turning transparent. She dropped it into a disposal tray that lost one side. Keep all active ink away from the gray tissue. Physical tools only. Dorian lifted his damaged hand. 3 fingers curled late. The smallest did not move. The medic said light blade. He stared at her. She said attempt 1. Dorian's jaw flexed. White light gathered above his palm. It formed half a hilt. The weapon bent toward his wrist, thinned, and broke into sparks. The gray advanced another line above the elbow. Mira said stop. He said he did stop. She said he tried again. He said he was instructed. The medic removed a leather strap from a cabinet. It carried no script, seal, or metal buckle. She tied Dorian's damaged wrist to the cot. His arm jerked against it. He said he didn't move that. They saw. His fingers closed into a blade grip. Nothing appeared inside them. The hand opened, closed again. Dorian watched it with open disgust and told them to make it stop. The medic said they need to know what it is first. Toby stood near the foot of the cot without his coat. Frost had stiffened one sleeve, so he had abandoned it in the corridor. He had been talking since they arrived. Directions. Bad questions. Complaints about the ward's lighting. Now he was silent. Dorian noticed and told him to say something useless. Toby rubbed his mouth and said his hair looks terrible. Dorian said better. The lead medic positioned Dorian's left arm beside the damaged one and said they were going to map the intact limb and impose its ending point onto the right. He asked if they're copying one arm over the other. She said only the boundary. He said he uses them differently. She said she knows. He said she doesn't. She met his stare and told him to say before they begin. Dorian flexed his left hand and explained his sword forms there when he needs reach. Right hand is faster close in. He changes grip when someone watches his shoulder instead of the blade. The medic adjusted 3 physical dials and asked if there's anything else. Mira said he drops his elbow before the reverse cut. Dorian turned his head and said he does not. She said he did it 6 times in the village. He said he was injured. She said he did it before the injury. He looked away. The medic placed a charcoal rod between the fingers of his left hand and said whatever the left does, the frame will ask the right to mirror. He asked what happens if the right can't. She said they find out. I said excellent hospital. The rings began turning. Knowing shone through them. Tiny steel pins dragged across paper strips, recording Dorian's physical outline through pressure and movement. His left fingers closed around the charcoal. The gray hand copied them. A second late. The little finger remained straight. The medic said again. Dorian opened his left hand. The right followed. Faster this time. The gray stopped spreading. Everyone in the room saw it. Nobody relaxed. Again. The left hand closed. The right copied. The black line at Dorian's elbow sharpened into a fixed border. Then his right hand twisted into a sword grip without instruction. The frame screamed. A thin white cut opened across the ceiling with no blade behind it. The stone above me split from wall to wall. I threw myself aside as a ceiling plate smashed through where I had been standing. Another invisible cut opened across the treatment frame. The wrist ring fell in half. The gray hand slashed again. No light appeared, but the air separated. A brass wall brace snapped and spun across the room. Toby caught Dorian's left wrist and told him to name 5 things he hates. This treatment. 1. The restraints. 2. His face. Predictable. 3. The writer. I flinched. The medic's voice. That ceiling. The fact that this is working. His right hand fought to close. Toby forced the charcoal across Dorian's palm and told him to keep talking. Mira pressed the broken wrist ring across his palm. His hand pushed against it. The medic said, don't let the grip complete. The gray little finger bent. The invisible blade struck downward. Mira shifted the ring into its path. The metal split. The force continued into the cot, cutting through the mattress beneath Dorian's arm. Dorian pulled his left hand open so hard the charcoal snapped. The right hand opened with it. The room stopped breaking. The medic engaged the elbow ring manually. For steel teeth drove into the stone. The frame locked. The advancing gray struck the boundary at his elbow and moved no farther. She said spread arrested. I asked if reversed. She said no. Dorian looked at his arm. The gray remained from fingertips to below the elbow. Its surface had his shape and none of his warmth. He pressed his damaged thumb against the cot. Mira asked if he could feel that. He said no. Move the thumb. It moved after a pause. Little finger. Nothing. He watched it. Mira said again. He said he heard her. The finger twitched but did not bend. The medic removed the shoulder ring and said gross movement may improve. Sensation is unlikely to return soon. Fine control is uncertain. He asked about his blade. She said do not summon it with that hand. He said that wasn't the question. She said then no, not safely. His gray fingers closed into the empty grip again. The medic pushed them open and said the movement may continue on its own, especially under stress or during sleep. He asked if the spread can restart. She said they don't know. Dorian laughed once. Nobody joined him. The ward door opened. A tall woman in black and silver stepped through with 2 security officers behind her. Her hair was close-cropped, her posture straight, and her expression gave the room nothing. She looked at the broken ceiling, the split treatment frame, me, Priya's darkened arms, and Dorian's gray forearm. She said report. Priya answered from the doorway that it would be after he's stable. The woman's eyes moved to her. She said he is. Dorian lifted his numb hand. It closed around a weapon that was not there. The woman watched the involuntary motion and said field status suspended. Dorian's hand opened. His face did not. Achebe signed 3 suspension orders before I finished bleeding through my borrowed shirt. The cut beneath my ribs had looked shallow when I left the cannon. The ward disagreed. A nurse sealed it with a strip of cold paper and told me not to bend. I bent over the review table anyway. The paper pulled. I asked if this was a trial. Achebe said no. I said that's comforting. She said it shouldn't be. The review room contained 1 table, 5 chairs, and no shelves. Someone had removed every book, folder, and loose page before I entered. Priya sat across from me. Her sleeves were down now, hiding the dead arm script. Mira occupied the next chair with her knife sealed inside an evidence box. Toby stood rather than sit. Dorian was still in treatment. Achebe opened a plain notebook. The cover did not breathe. She said names. Priya looked at her and said, "We know our names." Achebe said, "For the record, we gave them." She wrote each one without comment. She asked my status. I said dead. Registered? No. Ink source? Borrowed. Canon clearance? None. She asked about my first actions in the Ember Sovereign. I said the sentence followed me. It entered the folder. The canon assigned me the role of unauthorized witness. Things I watched could survive the loop. Sometimes. She asked what else it preserved. I thought of the child's altered shadow, old Kale's climb, the village waking with 2 days of repeated fear. I said I don't know. She asked what I did before Dorian was injured. I said I stepped between him and old Kale because I thought I could get an answer. Achebe turned the notebook to show my own earlier statement. I entered the folder after my sentence. She said I wanted a better answer. I sat back. Achebe turned to Priya. She had emptied her reserve without authorization, entered the discard structure alone because my assigned role made me unsafe to send. She told the squad to stay visible, which Achebe noted was not the same as informing them. She cut the bridge after both versions of Kale objected. Achebe asked if it was necessary. Priya said it prevented further conversion into the dragon draft. Achebe asked again. Priya said she doesn't know. I turned toward her. She did not look back. Achebe addressed Mira. She had threatened to amputate Dorian's arm if the gray crossed the shoulder and intended to cut the buried versions loose on her own authority. Achebe said she didn't have that authority. Mira said she had the knife. Achebe watched her for a second longer. Then she wrote. She turned to Toby. He had rung the loop bell 3 times, the first causing prior versions to climb higher, the second to trap old Kale. He hadn't known the loop was feeding the well. She asked if he had asked. He said no. He did not joke after that. Achebe distributed containment orders. I could not enter a canon, handle narrative objects, or write fiction inside the margins. Priya's field authority was suspended. No crossings, no reserve transfer, no unsupervised total attention. Her squad was temporarily reassigned. Mission status closed for Mira and Toby, evidence access restricted, separate reports required. Toby said that feels worse. The door opened. A medic entered. Dorian stood behind her. He had refused the recovery chair. His right arm was wrapped from wrist to elbow in plain black cloth. The fingers remained exposed. Gray. Still. Achebe looked at him and told him to sit. He said no. She asked about medical status. He said annoying. The medic answered. Spread contained. Function impaired. Prognosis uncertain. Achebe asked for his account. Dorian said I stepped into the strike. I moved him. Old Kale hit him. Achebe asked if I was reckless. Yes. Should I be held responsible? The room tightened. Dorian said I caused the situation. Achebe waited. He said that isn't an answer. She said that's the one he has. Dorian looked at the suspension order in front of me and asked what I lose. Achebe said canon access, narrative objects, writing privileges. He asked about Priya. She said field command. Dorian looked at her. Something passed between them. Anger, perhaps. Recognition. Neither offered the other comfort. Achebe gathered the pages and said until the contaminated folder is cleared, none of us leave this level. Priya's attention sharpened and asked if the folder is still active. Achebe said it stopped breathing 20 minutes ago. Priya said that isn't cleared. Achebe said no. Priya asked where it is. Achebe said evidence. Priya stood. Achebe remained seated and told her to sit down. Priya said if the folder stopped breathing after Kale survived, something changed. Achebe said she is suspended. Priya said so is gravity in half the canons they work in, and they still account for it. Achebe's gaze hardened. Priya sat. Then a bell rang beyond the review room. One sharp note. Then every light above the table turned gold. Black letters appeared across Achebe's closed notebook. Editorial review. Cast incomplete. A second line wrote itself beneath the first. Return the witness. Achebe looked at me and said my containment status had lasted 6 minutes. The wall behind me became wheat. Priya deleted one sentence from her report and left the worse one beneath it. The deleted line had called severing the bridge the only viable action. The surviving line read, I acted without consent because I believed delay would produce greater harm. She submitted it. The records clerk took the report with both hands and asked if she wanted to include a justification. She said that is the justification. He said it doesn't protect her field status. She said she knows. The clerk sealed the report. Across the administrative floor, workers replaced walls damaged during the evidence breach. The corridors still smelled of wheat and scorched paper. One black scale remained embedded above a doorway because no one had found a safe way to remove it. Priya kept seeing it move. Her attention was exhausted, and the suspension seal made every attempt to inspect the scale burn beneath her wrists. She looked away. Achabi had moved the final review into an ordinary office. The table was too small for everyone, so Toby stood again. Dorian sat this time because the medic had ordered him to. His right arm rested inside a rigid black brace that prevented the fingers from completing a sword grip. He had tried to remove it twice. Mira kept the key. I wore a fresh medical seal over my ribs. Red marks circled both wrists where the report had bound me. Achabi placed the stabilized folder in a glass box between us. It no longer breathed. Nobody trusted that. She said the M- entered Ember Sovereign 6 months ago. I looked at the date plate and said I wrote the opening last night. She said according to me. I said according to my laptop. She said we don't have that. I said I died in another world. She said also according to me. Toby glanced at Achabi and asked if she interrogates gravity like this. She said when it behaves incorrectly. I touched the black ring around my ankle beneath the table and asked if she's saying I'm lying. She said no. I asked what she's saying. Achabi slid the date plate closer and said my memory cannot explain the record. Priya studied the folder through the glass and asked if the mark was dormant. Achabi said until today. Priya asked about other changes near the date. Achabi said 1 axis fluctuation. From where? Unresolved. Dorian leaned back and said the sentence reached the canon before I did. Achabi said part of it. Mira asked if it can do that again. Unknown. Can I? Unknown. Dorian looked at me and said useful. I did not answer. Achabi distributed 4 orders. Dorian received medical suspension, mandatory monitoring, and limited access to the training hall. He read the final line and asked if he requires an escort. She said until he can reliably stop the grip movement. He said his left hand works. She said his right hand cuts walls. He said it cut a hostile page. She said it cut a ceiling first. Dorian pushed the paper away. He did not argue further. That was worse. Mira received temporary squad coordination authority for medical and administrative matters. She looked at Priya and said she didn't ask for this. Achabi said no one did. Toby received no field restriction. Instead, Achabi assigned him to incident reconstruction. He stared at the order and said she wants him doing paperwork. She said he triggered 3 loops and would document each one. He said cruelty has become procedural. She said yes. Priya's order kept her field authority suspended and added a requirement: no use of total attention without a second editor present. Her mouth tightened. She said Achabi was assigning someone to watch her look. Achabi said she was assigning someone to confirm what she reports. Priya said that will slow every read. Achabi said yes. Priya folded the order. I received the longest page. Provisional existence registration. The word stopped me. I asked what existence registration is. Achabi said I need a legal status before they can decide what to do with me. I asked what the options are. She said few. She tapped the first section. I would receive a temporary errata signature, housing, food access, medical treatment, and supervised training. The next section restricted every one of those privileges. No unsupervised contact with canons. No active writing. No handling narrative artifacts. No travel beyond the intake and training levels. No use of the unauthorized witness designation as proof of rank, ability, or authority. The final line assigned me a provisional role. Proofreader candidate. I looked up and asked if she's recruiting me. She said she's containing me somewhere useful. I said honest. She said it saves time. Priya shifted in her chair. Achabi noticed and asked if there was an objection. Priya said yes. I turned toward her. She did not avoid my gaze and said I should not be under her sole supervision. The room changed without moving. Toby stopped reading his order. Mira looked at the folded page inside Priya's code as if she already knew what it was. I said she requested reassignment. Priya's expression gave away the answer. I asked when. She said before the breach. I asked why she didn't tell me. She said I was in containment. I said that isn't why. She said no. Achabi waited. Priya continued. She said I need someone willing to stop me before understanding becomes intervention. I looked at her darkened arms and said she needs someone willing to stop her before judgment becomes authority. She said yes. No one tried to turn that into agreement. Achebe took the supervisory request from Priya. She tore it in half. Priya's eyes narrowed. Achebe placed one piece in front of Mira and said shared supervision. Mira looked at me and said I won't like that. Achebe said good. The other half went back to Priya. She said Priya remains responsible for the anomaly she extracted. Priya said she was hoping the review would avoid phrasing me as property. Achebe looked at me and asked if I consider myself extracted property. I said no. She said recorded. I almost smiled. Almost. Achebe closed the folder and assigned everyone their tasks. Dorian goes to medical housing. Toby reconstructs the loops. Mira handles movement permissions. Priya submits to reserve assessment. I complete registration. I asked about the 6-month mark. Achebe stood and said they investigate. I asked if that's it. She said for today. She opened the office door. The corridor beyond remained under repair. 2 workers were trying to remove the black scale above the doorway with wooden poles. Achebe stopped beside me and said the first rule of institutional survival is learning which answer you are actually owed. Then she left. Dorian rose slowly. His brace clicked when the gray hand tried to close. I moved my chair aside to give him room. He paused. For a second I thought he might speak. He walked past. Toby followed, carrying 3 reconstruction forms. Mira remained long enough to collect everyone's access orders. Priya stood last. I looked at the torn reassignment page in her hand and said she wanted out. She said she wanted another person in the room. I said that is not the same thing. She said no. I asked if she thought I'd ignore her again. Priya considered the question and said she thought I might decide the danger made permission unnecessary. I looked down at the restraint marks around my wrists and said I might have. She said that is why she filed it. She left. I completed registration alone. The clerk pressed a plain strip of artificial ink across my sternum. It sank beneath my skin without the intimacy of Priya's transfer. My name appeared on the metal plate. Elias Vance. Origin, unresolved. Status, provisional. Rank, none. Beneath those lines, a date printed itself. The clerk frowned and said that's wrong. I looked. The registration system had assigned me an initial detection date. Not today. Not the date from the Ember Sovereign folder. 31 years earlier. The day Elias Vance was born. A second field appeared beneath it. Location of first detection, the Ember Sovereign. The clerk reached for the plate. I caught his wrist and told him not to erase it. He stared at me. I released him and said sorry. The plate continued writing. First recorded status, unauthorized witness. The registration clerk handed me a housing form and kept the pen. He asked my name. I said he printed it at the top. He said say it. I said Elias Vance. Room preference? I said I'm dead, unemployed, and legally provisional. My standards have survived none of those events. He waited. I said near a bathroom. Reason? Optimism. He marked the form himself. I watched the pen move. It was a plain instrument, dull steel with a black grip. No glow. No breathing cover. No obvious hunger for reality. I wanted it badly enough to feel embarrassed. I asked if I can fill out my own form. He said no active writing. I said that means fiction. He said it means writing. I asked about a shopping list. He said I don't have purchasing access. A letter? Dictation grill. My signature? Thumb mark. I looked at the black square waiting at the bottom of the form. Before dying, I had signed almost nothing. Rental agreements. Delivery receipts. A birthday card for my mother I had mailed 2 weeks late. 31 chapters carried my name beneath the title. That had counted for more. I pressed my thumb into the square. Artificial ink climbed into the ridges of my skin and left a sharp black print. The clerk turned the page away before I could read what had appeared underneath. He said room 18, intake housing. I asked how long I'm there. He said until placement changes. I said temporary. He said he didn't say that. He passed me a thin metal tag. Elias Vance. Provisional existence. Restricted. The final word was larger than my name. Mira waited beyond the registration counter with a canvas bag over one shoulder and a ring of keys clipped to her belt. Her right shoulder no longer wore a bandage, though she kept the arm close to her body. She looked at my tag and told me to put it under my shirt. I asked why. She said some doors scan it, and some people stare. I asked which is worse. She said depends on the person. She handed me the bag. It contained 2 gray shirts, trousers, underclothes, socks, a towel, a bar of soap without a wrapper, and a pair of soft black boots. No paper. No labels. Even the clothing sizes had been stitched into the inside, seams as patterns of raised thread rather than numbers. I held up the boots and asked if they fit. She said they should. I said that's confidence. She said it's measurement. We walked through the intake level. The areta was larger than I had understood during the emergency. Corridors intersected at angles that should have returned us to places we had already passed. Some ceilings opened onto additional floors built upside down. Doors carried brass plates engraved with titles instead of room numbers. Medical intake. Object quarantine. Crossing maintenance. A red door stood alone between two blank walls. I slowed and asked what's in there. She said nothing I can access. I said that answer makes it worse. Mira kept walking. I followed because my tag had already flashed red when I drifted too close to an unmarked stairwell. People passed us in different uniforms. Gray coats like Priya's. Black and silver robes like Achabe's. Workers in brown aprons pushing carts filled with sealed objects. One cart held a jar of rain falling upward. Another carried 6 swords chained into a bundle. Each whispered a different person's name when I passed. I kept my hands in my pockets. Mira said that's the first sensible thing I've done today. I said I'm learning. She said no, I'm afraid of the swords. I said that can also be learning. My room sat at the end of a short hall with 12 identical doors. The metal tag opened number 18 after rejecting me twice. Inside waited a bed, a wash basin, a narrow wardrobe, and a desk. I stopped in the doorway. The desk held nothing. I set the canvas bag down and ran a hand across the bare surface. Mira leaned against the frame and asked if there's a problem. I said no. She said I said that like a problem. I said I used to write at a desk. She said this one is for meals and approved work. I said which I can't do. She said I can eat. I said a full creative life. Myra's face did not soften. She said they removed the drawer. I looked beneath the tabletop. She was right. Faint screw holes marked where a drawer had once been attached. I asked if it was for me. She said for restricted residents. I asked how many there are. She said she doesn't know. I said she has keys to all the rooms. She said she has keys to the doors. That isn't the same as knowing the people. She put a folded schedule on the desk. I reached for it. Mira kept one finger on the paper and said I can read it, but I cannot add anything. I said I understand what restricted means. She said I touched an active cannon after being told not to. I said I was pulled into it. She said I stepped between 2 swords after that. I looked at her hand on the schedule and asked if she wants to supervise me or punish me. Mira considered and said today, supervise. She released the paper. The schedule listed meals, medical checks, equipment issue, basic physical training, and something called entry discipline. I said Priya isn't on this. She said no. Dorian? Medical housing. Toby? Records. I folded the schedule and asked if I'm allowed to know where they sleep. She said yes. I said but. She said, but she's not telling me tonight. I asked why. She said because Dorian asked not to see me. The answer hit with no drama attached. Mira walked away. At the door she stopped and said medical check in 20 minutes. Wash first. They'll inspect the ankle. I looked down at my right boot. The black ring lay hidden beneath it. I said it hasn't changed. Myra's gaze stayed on my face. She said she didn't ask. She left. The door locked after her. I took my first shower after death. The water came from a brass pipe with no controls. It adjusted to my skin, warm along my shoulders and cooler over the rib wound. The medical seal remained dry. I sat on the stone bench because my ankle began hurting as soon as the boot came off. The black ring circled the joint. I raised my foot. The ring remained on the floor. For less than a second, a perfect black circle stayed behind where my ankle had been. Then it snapped upward and rejoined my skin. I stopped breathing. I lowered the foot, lifted it again. The mark lagged. This time, the heel went slightly transparent before the ring caught up. I thought of the medical ward. Black restraints. Instruments fading near Dorian's arm. Achabe's word, containment. I imagined a new tag. Object. I imagined losing the room, the training schedule, doors I could still open. I imagined someone deciding that an ankle which did not remain attached to its own mark was too dangerous to belong to me. The medical check form waited inside the wall grill when I finished dressing. A voice asked questions from the other side. Pain level? 4. Loss of sensation? No. Changes to blank boundary? I stared at my ankle. The ring remained in place. I said no. Visual delay? My mouth went dry. I said no. A pause. Any concern I have not reported? I put the boot on and said no. The grill clicked shut. My first deliberate lie in the errata entered the record as stable. I failed the first exercise because I opened the door. The training room contained a painted wooden frame standing upright in the center of the floor. No wall surrounded it. Through the opening, I could see the same room from a slightly different angle. Mira stood beside the frame with a timing device. I asked what the objective was. She said walk through. I said no. She asked why put a door here. I said to see whether I enter before understanding the assignment. She said that feels personal. I said it became personal when I entered. I stepped back through the frame. The room on the other side had no Mira. I turned. The doorway had vanished. An empty training hall stretched around me. The equipment racks were in the wrong places. The lamps gave off blue light instead of white. A metal mannequin stood against the far wall. Its head turned. I froze. The mannequin raised one arm and pointed toward the floor. A red line appeared beneath my feet. A voice came through the ceiling. Candidate entered without an anchor. Mira. Distant, slightly distorted. I said I thought it wasn't active. She said I was told nothing of the kind. The mannequin took one step toward me. I asked what it does. She said removes unanchored trainees. I asked from the exercise. She said usually. The mannequin began walking. I searched my issued belt. Basic proofreader equipment had sounded more impressive at the counter. 1 coil of continuity cord. 3 plain chalk sticks. 2 folded paper nails. A brass clip. No weapon. I grabbed the cord and threw one end toward where the doorway had been. It landed on the floor. The mannequin accelerated. I drew a chalk circle around myself. Nothing happened. The mannequin crossed it. I said help would be educational. She said use the clip. I pulled the brass clip free. The mannequin reached me. I slapped the clip onto its chest. A bell rang. The mannequin punched me in the stomach. I folded around the blow. The clip remained attached to the mannequin, doing absolutely nothing. Mira said wrong target. The mannequin grabbed my collar. I looked at the cord on the floor. Anchor. I clipped the cord to my own belt. The missing doorway reappeared. Mira stood on the other side and said now pull. I seized the cord and dragged myself toward the opening while the mannequin held my shirt. The fabric tore. I hit the training room floor bare-chested, rolled once, and stopped beside Myra's boots. She clicked the timer and said 2 minutes, 11 seconds. I said I solved it. She said I created the problem. I said and then solved it. She said the mannequin could have removed me. I said usually. Mira looked down at me and said that word bothered me. I said it should bother everyone. She said it's on the training waiver. I said I wasn't allowed to write on the waiver. She said I was allowed to read it. I sat up and accepted the spare shirt she threw at me. The next exercise was equipment recognition. Mira arranged 6 objects on a table. A chalk stick. A paper nail. A glass marble holding a storm cloud. A plain key. A black feather. A spoon. She said touch the safe items. I said the spoon is a trap. She asked why. I said it looks too innocent. She said touch the safe items. I chose the chalk, paper nail, and key. The key screamed. I dropped it. The black feather turned toward the sound. Mira covered it with a metal cup before it could rise. She said the key belonged to a prison cannon and it opens the nearest person. I looked at my hand and asked her to define opens. She said no. I asked about the spoon. She said lunchroom. I said I knew it. She said I knew the wrong thing confidently. I touched the spoon. Safe. The storm marble was safe inside the training field. The chalk was not. Its last user had written an instruction it still intended to finish. By the 6th exercise I had failed 4 and passed 1 by accident. Mira recorded every result on a slate I was not allowed to hold. She said experience inside Ember Sovereign does not count as training. I said I noticed. She said I survived because other people knew what to do. I said I contributed. She said yes. The agreement annoyed me. Mira set a sealed wooden box on the table. Cannon entry procedure. I straightened. The box carried 3 brass latches and a small viewing slot. I asked if that's a cannon. She said no. It contains a dead scene shell. Dead like inactive? Dead like no longer attached to a story. I said that sounds safe in a way I no longer trust. She said good. She opened the first latch and said before entry, state the objective. I said observe the scene shell. Too broad. Find the active error. There may be none. Confirm whether an error exists. Better. Second latch. Exit condition. When the objective is complete. No. When the room becomes dangerous. Subjective. I rub my face. When the continuity cord changes color, when I lose contact with the anchor, or when she orders withdrawal. Mira opened the third latch and said acceptable. The viewing slot showed an abandoned railway platform under a black sky. No tracks were visible beyond the edge. A wooden bench stood beneath a clock frozen at midnight. Mira asked about entry authorization. I looked at her and said she hasn't given it. She said good. She closed the box and said that's the exercise. I said she made me do 6 hours of training to test whether I'd wait. She said 23 minutes. I said that cannot be true. She said the room alters time perception when I complain. I stared at her. Myra's mouth moved by perhaps half a smile. The door opened behind us. Priya entered with a second editor carrying a recording slate. A black seal circled each of Priya's wrists. She stopped when she saw the closed scene shell and asked if Mira cleared me for entry simulation. Mira said she cleared me to state procedure. Priya looked at my torn shirt in the discard bin and asked how that went. I said I was attacked by furniture. She said mannequin. I said allegedly. The second editor stood close enough to Priya to read every movement of her eyes. Priya noticed me noticing. Her shoulders tightened. Mira picked up the training slate and said the assessment room is next door. Priya said she knows. The editor beside Priya said she is required to remain within 2 steps. Priya said she also knows. They left. I watched the seals disappear through the door. Mira tapped the slate against my arm and said focus. I said I was. She said on someone else's restriction. I said she emptied her reserve, saving my leg. Mira said she entered the well without telling us. I said both can matter. She said yes. Mira carried the scene shell towards storage. I followed. My ankle mark lagged when I stepped over the red boundary line. Mira stopped. I kept walking. She said take off the boot. I turned and asked what. She said right boot. I said my medical check cleared it. She said she didn't ask about the check. I said it's fine. Mira set the box down and said I looked behind myself when I crossed the line. I said so. She said people check whether they left something behind. I said nothing. Mira pointed at a bench and said boot. I said no. That word changed her face. She did not reach for me. She said then training is over. I said she can't stop everything because I don't take off a shoe. She said she can stop anything under her supervision. I said I'm not a child. She said then make an adult decision. I asked which one, give her access to my body or lose training. She said yes. I laughed without humor and said she sounds like the clerk. Myra's injured shoulder shifted beneath her jacket. She said I think she'll report me and they'll put me in a smaller room. I looked at her. She had found the fear too quickly. She said maybe they will. I asked if that's supposed to help. She said no, she's not promising what she can't control. The red boundary line hummed beneath my boot. I sat. I removed it. The black ring circled my ankle. Mira watched me lift the foot. The mark remained on the floor. It snapped back into place. Neither spoke. Mira took the timing device from her belt and placed it beside the ring. She said again. The delay measured 0.8 of a second. She repeated it. 0.9. On the third attempt, my heel became transparent. Mira picked up her slate. I said if she writes that down they'll restrict me further. She said yes. I said I trusted her. She said no, I got caught. The words landed cleanly. I put the boot back on and asked if she's reporting it. She said yes. I stood. Mira added she was also reporting that I disclosed after direct confrontation and that the mark remained locally attached. I said that sounds almost generous. She said it isn't. She locked the scene shell away and said tomorrow's training is canceled. I asked because of the ankle. She said because I lied. She left me alone with 6 objects I still could not identify safely. Dorian lost a fight with his sleeve. The shirt had 6 buttons. He managed the first 2 with his left hand. The third slipped beneath his thumb. The fourth entered the wrong hole. By the time he reached the collar, the lower half had pulled sideways across his chest. His gray hand rested inside the medical brace. The fingers closed against the internal stops. Click. Released. Click. Dorian tore the shirt open with his left hand. 2 buttons struck the mirror. The rehabilitation attendant waited by the door and said he has 3 adapted options. Dorian said no. 1 uses hooks. No. 1 closes at the shoulder. No. The third has no fasteners. He said that's a sack. She said it is a shirt. He said it has ambitions. The attendant placed all 3 on the bed and left. Dorian stood shirtless in front of the mirror. The gray forearm looked flatter beneath ordinary light. A thin black line marked where the spread had stopped below the elbow. The gold scar across his palm disappeared whenever he turned the hand away from the lamp. He released the brace. The fingers closed immediately. An invisible edge formed for less than a second. The mirror split from top to bottom. Dorian refastened the brace. The broken half showed him twice. Neither reflection looked surprised. He chose the shoulder-closing shirt. He told himself it was because the material moved better. Breakfast required another decision. The medical dining room supplied bowls with high rims, weighted cups, thick-handled utensils, and trays that clipped to the table. Dorian carried his tray in his left hand. The cup slid. A woman from another table caught it before it fell. He took it from her and said thank you. She nodded. No pity. That annoyed him less than it should have. He sat alone. The spoon felt wrong in his left hand. His shoulder tried to compensate for movements his wrist had not learned. Half the food reached his mouth. The rest landed on the table. Toby placed a reconstruction folder opposite him. Dorian said he's eating. Toby said he needs Dorian's sequence for the last reset. Dorian said he was there. Toby said he was attached to a rope, facing a chapel, and lying to 40 villagers about an emergency festival. The folder showed the square from above, the well at the center, arrows marking each person. No jokes in the margins. Dorian asked what was wrong. Toby said the cannon's timing placed Dorian's bell ring before Kale climbed out, not after. 3-time records contradicted each other. Priya's field clock, the chapel mechanism, and the village loop count all placed the bell event at different moments. Dorian said that was impossible. Toby took the spoon from Dorian's left hand and returned it. Dorian accepted it before realizing he had. Toby said he froze before old Kale attacked. He had heard the bell before they entered. Dorian asked why he didn't say. Toby said Priya was dragging a living folder through intake. Dorian's arm was vanishing. I had arrived without existing. He ranked his concerns. Dorian said he forgot. Toby said he avoided. The distinction came too quickly. Dorian studied him and asked if he knew the sound. Toby folded one corner of the map, then flattened it again. He said he knew the timing. Places that repeat often leave an echo ahead of themselves. Dorian asked from where. Toby said bad work. Dorian said that isn't an answer. Toby said it is the one he's using. Dorian's gray fingers pushed against the brace. Click. Toby heard it and asked if that hurts. Dorian said no. Toby asked what it feels like. Dorian said nothing. Toby said that is worse. Dorian's eyes lifted. Toby looked back at the map. No polished sympathy. No immediate apology for asking. Dorian picked up the spoon and asked what Toby needs. He said exact position when Kale gave him the sword. They worked through breakfast. Toby asked short questions. Dorian corrected the map. At the third loop, Toby's humor returned because a passing medic had begun listening. Toby asked if Dorian was here, 2 feet left. Dorian said that puts him inside the pair stall. Dorian said the stall was broken. Toby said fruit-based tactical cover. Dorian said write that, and he breaks his left hand. Toby wrote, market edge, structure compromised. When the medic left, the joke stopped. At the bottom of the final page, a field waited uncompleted. Unaccounted loop participants. The system found 7 signatures around the bell, but one appeared during every reset and matched no person. It matched the folder's pre-entry mark, the M-. Toby's handwriting changed as he wrote it, the letters becoming narrower, almost mechanical. Dorian saw it. Toby shut the folder and said reconstruction complete. Dorian fitted the cup into the damaged hand. He could not feel its weight. His eyes supplied what the nerves would not. The fingers started forming the phantom grip. He stopped the movement with his left thumb. The cup reached his mouth. Water spilled down his chin. He drank anyway. Toby looked toward the door until Dorian set it down. Neither mentioned it. Priya failed the cup test in front of junior editor Leo Fun, who was younger than her coat. 3 identical cups sat on a white table. One held water. One held dormant ink. One had spent 4 years inside a romance canon and warmed whenever 2 people lied near it. Under normal conditions, total attention would have separated them in seconds. She reached. The suspension seals tightened. Her attention moved through the permitted channel. Slowly, the cups blurred together. Leo said do not read beyond the test area. Priya closed her eyes and said that doesn't help. He said he's required to note deviations. She said he noted her breathing. He said it changed. She said it changes frequently. Another mark. Priya wanted to turn and take the slate from his hands. She kept her arms at her sides. The left cup carried a dense center. Dormant ink. The middle cup warmed. Priya looked at Leo and asked if he was lying. He said no. The middle cup warmed further. She looked toward the wall. Someone in the next room was answering a medical questionnaire. The cup had extended its context beyond the test. She answered. Leo said incorrect. The plate disagreed with her readings. She said the middle cup responded to lies through the wall. He said the plate disagrees. She said the plate is wrong. She bent toward the left cup and saw her own reflection, the correction text from Ember Sovereign crawling across the reflected skin of her forearm. Editorial contaminant. Her attention was contaminating the objects it inspected. One attempt only. She said the test was compromised by her condition. He said that is the result being measured. Her reads could not currently be treated as non-interfering observation. Achabi waited outside. She read Leo's slate while walking through a corridor lined with reserve transfer stations. Priya had supervised the room dozens of times. Now her access tag flashed amber at every station. Suspension stance. Priya said the answer plate was wrong. Achabi said it may have become wrong because she inspected it. Priya said she needs an uncontrolled environment. Achabi said no. She said Priya was making a practical decision with incomplete evidence. Priya disliked the logic because it did not pretend to be justice. Achabi held out a small sealed strip and said records access. Priya had requested the birth date logs. Priya took it and asked if it was supervised. Achabi said of course. Priya asked by Leo. Achabi asked if she prefers someone older. Priya said she prefers someone who doesn't record blinking as misconduct. Achabi looked at the slate and said it says physiological deviation. Priya said that is worse. The records vault held no paper. Dates, crossings, and detections occupied narrow metal plates in rotating columns. Priya entered my name. 3 records appeared. Elias Vance first detected in the Ember Sovereign on date of birth. No matching person present in canon occupancy. Unresolved witness reference attached to protagonistry rights cycle. The systems agreed on the date and disagreed on what existed. The occupancy record denied I had ever lived there. The annotation record treated me as a reference written around the canon, not a person inside it. The existence registry had converted the reference into a body. She opened the 6-month M-record. Maintenance route, 9 null. Source, internal. Destination, the Ember Sovereign. Authorization, automatic. Leo asked internal to what? Priya said the route. He said that isn't possible. She said now he's learning. Route 9 null was restricted, decommissioned infrastructure. Achabi had already quarantined it before Priya completed the search. Quarantine first. Certainty later. Route 9 null had carried nothing for 63 years. 6 months ago, it opened for less than 1 second and delivered the M-. The system logged no sender but did log a return item. Return cargo, 1 in used entry permission. Status, unclaimed. Location, training storage. Priya looked toward Leo and asked which storage level. He checked his slate and said candidate instruction. My level. The vault lights shifted from white to amber. Achabi's quarantine had begun. Metal columns folded inward, sealing Route 9 null beneath blank plates. Priya copied the return cargo line onto Leo's slate before it disappeared and told him to send it to Mira. He said Warden Achabi ordered route quarantine. She said this is not the route. He said it came from it. Priya met his eyes and told him to decide whether he's here to observe her or prevent her from thinking. Leo hesitated, then sent the line. It was the first unscripted decision he had made all morning. Toby's reconstruction returned with 17 objections. Rejected, sequence inconsistent. Participant count invalid. Pre-entry event cannot occur. The last objection had been stamped 3 times, as though repetition might repair reality. He opened the report. His map remained intact, Dorian's corrections filling the margins. The reviewer had crossed out the unaccounted signature. Toby uncrossed it. The ink returned and crossed his words out again. He said petty. The office door opened. Mira entered carrying a sealed message strip. She asked if he was finished. He said it finished rejecting him. She dropped the strip beside the report. Priya's copied record glowed across it. Return cargo, 1 in used entry permission. Location, training storage. Mira read Toby's face and asked if he knows what that means. He said he knows what the individual words mean. She said Toby. He rubbed both hands over his face and explained that entry permissions are paired. One opens the route from outside. One confirms the destination, accepts the arrival. Mira said so. He said if Route 9 null delivered an M- into Ember's sovereign, the return permission means the cannon accepted something back. Mira asked if it was me. He said the occupancy log says no. His role? Maybe. She said his reconstruction shows the mark around the bell before they entered. He said yes. Mira put one finger on the map and said the bell created the loop. The loop let the old versions climb. The mark was already inside the loop. Toby leaned back and said the sentence didn't just enter the cannon from the folder. Part of it was waiting in the reset. Mira asked if an unused permission can cause that. He said no. She said he answered quickly. He looked at the clocks. The recursive one had stopped. Mira waited. He gave up pretending and said a permission is only a key. It doesn't decide where the door leads. Mira asked who does. He said a router. Route 9 null. A person operating it. The record says automatic. He said records can be taught words. Mira said he'd seen people hide orders inside routine processes. Label it maintenance. Let the system carry it. By the time anyone notices, the sender is gone. Toby said he recognized the pattern. She said it became relevant when he did. He pointed at the return cargo strip and said they should find the permission. She said she'd sent someone to secure storage. A candidate attendant. Toby went pale. Unused permissions respond to entry intent. Candidates spend all day wanting doors to open. They ran. Training storage sat 2 levels below. The lift refused Myra's access because the alarm had not yet been authorized. She used the stairs. Toby kept pace until the old shoulder injury under his shirt pulled his breathing uneven. He hid it by speaking. Good news, the permission isn't used. Bad news. It may consider that a problem. The candidate attendant stood outside the open storage door. At the center sat the wooden scene shell I had used during training, its 3 brass latches open. A black railway platform showed through the viewing slot. A paper ticket rested on the bench with one name across it. Elias Vance. The manifest had changed. Return destination. The clock inside the dead scene moved. 1 minute past midnight. A train whistle sounded from beyond the platform. There were no tracks. The train arrived through the wall. A black iron engine broad enough to fill the room. Its wheels turning against empty air, throwing sparks that became letters. The engine struck the scene shell. Wood exploded. Midnight spread across the corridor. Rain hit Toby's face and a platform extended in both directions beneath a starless sky. A sign wrote itself. Return service. 1 passenger. The train doors opened. Paper people stepped out with faces folded from blank tickets, each holding a hole puncher. Toby said he was beginning to dislike public transport. Mira drove the first conductor into the platform. Her knife pinned its paper shadow, but the body kept moving. No attached cannon. Shadow rule doesn't hold. The conductor punched a hole through the floor. Everything inside the circle vanished. Toby tore the destination board from the wall and swung it like a club. Strong commitment to customer service, he said. Mira threw her knife through a second conductor's wrist. Toby ripped free, leaving half his coat behind. Across the intake level, my metal tag turned hot. The wall grill shouted restricted candidate, remain in housing. The door unlocked. Those instructions disagreed. A voice came through the corridor. Mira, distorted. Do not approach training storage. The wall answered in a mechanical voice. Return destination active. Passenger required. The floor tilted toward the stairwell. Every restricted door along the corridor opened at once. The pull increased. I grabbed the continuity cord and clipped it around the bed frame. The frame tore from the floor, and I shot into the corridor with it. I wrapped the cord around a wall pipe. The pull dragged me to my knees. My ankle mark lagged behind, the black ring stretching into an oval. On the platform, the train's empty destination window filled with light. The conductors stopped fighting. All folded faces turned toward the far end of the corridor. Toward me. Mira saw it and said the permission is pulling me. Toby stared at the train and said because the ticket has my name. She asked if he can remove it. He said it's inside. She said then get inside. The train doors began closing. Toby ran. Mira caught the back of his shirt and said he recognizes the route. He said he recognizes bad ideas. She said that was not a denial. He said no time. He pulled free and jumped through the narrowing doors. Mira followed. The train interior was longer than the platform, rows of empty seats extending through carriage after carriage. Brass luggage racks held sealed boxes, broken weapons, nameless books. The return permission had collected everything Route 9 Null had failed to deliver. Toby looked at the routing symbols scratched into the carriage doors. Old format. Old enough. The conductors entered behind them. Toby slammed the carriage door. They ran. My bed frame lodged sideways in the stairwell. The cord snapped tight. My right foot passed through the top stair. For one sickening moment, my lower leg existed inside solid stone. I chose neither option. I climbed down the cord hand over hand, toward the pole. The ring followed in jumps. Each time it caught up, more of my leg became solid. A security door blocked the training corridor. Access denied. I wrapped the continuity line through the handle and clipped the other end to my tag. The tag tried to return me to my room. The permission tried to pull me toward the train. The two instructions fought. Metal shrieked. The black ring around my ankle slid 6 inches up my leg. Then the door tore from its hinges. Midnight flooded the stairwell. For conductors waited on the platform. They raised their hole punchers. I had no weapon. I picked up the bent security door. It weighed less inside the dead scene. I charged. The first punch removed a circular section near my head. The second cut through the lower edge. I drove the remaining metal into 2 conductors and carried them into the train. Paper bodies folded around the door. The third conductor reached my exposed side. A white blade cut through it. Dorian stood at the edge of the platform. Medical brace locked over his right forearm. Practice sword in his left. A security escort lay unconscious behind him. I stared and asked if he's allowed here. He said no. The fourth conductor attacked. Dorian stepped left and cut upward. His blade split the paper body from hip to shoulder. The halves fell. His gray hand closed inside the brace. Click. An invisible cut opened through the train roof. Rain poured inside. Dorian looked at the brace and said he didn't mean that. I said useful. He said don't. We entered the train. The doors slammed shut behind us. The engine began moving without rails. I felt the Ureta fall away. I said no. I wrapped continuity cord around his seat support and threw the free end through the broken roof. It caught on the platform clock. The train pulled. The clock tore from its post. Still attached. The platform stretched with us instead of disappearing. Dorian looked up through the roof and said I anchored the train to the scene. I said I think. He said confidence remains inspiring. We ran forward. Mira and Toby reached the engine carriage first. The ticket sat beneath a glass cover beside the controls. Elias Vance. Return accepted. Toby reached for it. Mira caught his hand and asked if it's a trap. He said yes. She asked how. He said he doesn't know. She said good. She broke the glass with the hilt of her knife. An alarm began. The paper conductors behind them punched through the carriage door. Toby seized the ticket. For 1 second, he stood in a narrow maintenance corridor. A younger Toby knelt beside Route 9, Null's control panel, pressing an M- into an outgoing slot. The image vanished. Mira asked what he saw. He said later. The train accelerated. Ahead, the engine's front window showed my housing room. The desk. The missing drawer. The route intended to return its passenger there. Mira asked if it's doing that with the train. Toby said apparently. He flipped the ticket. Instructions covered the back. Entry permission and used. Return requires original authorizer or named passenger. Conductors poured through the carriage door. Mira used the seats against them, cutting straps and kicking frames loose. Toby shouted my name from the luggage rack. Dorian's left-hand blade held. His right brace clicked faster with each strike. One conductor punched a hole through the practice sword. Dorian drove his shoulder into the creature and threw it through a window. The gray hand completed its grip. An invisible slash cut the continuity cord. The train broke free of the platform. Midnight began swallowing the Ureta. I grabbed the severed cord. Dorian asked if I can do that again. I said I can't do it once. We need the engine disconnected. Dorian looked toward the front carriage. Mira was fighting in the narrow aisle. Toby held the ticket above his head, while paper hands reached from both sides. Dorian removed the brace. His gray fingers closed. The gold scar lit. He aimed the empty grip at the coupling. Nothing happened. He tried again. The invisible blade formed crooked and cut through the carriage floor. I said left. His right hand mirrors the left. He raised his left hand around an imaginary hilt. The gray hand copied it. Delayed. I seized his left wrist and adjusted the angle. The train window filled with the housing room. Seconds left. The engine separated. It crashed into my room alone. The desk vanished beneath black iron. Toby slapped the ticket against my chest. Accept return. Say yes. I said that sounds suspicious. He said it is. The scene shell collapsed. I looked at Mira. She nodded once. I said yes. The ticket burned through my shirt. The dead scene spat us out. I hit the floor beside Dorian. Mira landed on her damaged shoulder. Toby remained upright for one proud second before a suitcase knocked him down. Achebe entered with 6 officers. She surveyed the room. Dorian said he's going to medical and walked out before anyone stopped him. A routing code remained visible along the burned ticket's edge. 9 null. One name survived. Tobias Q. Toby snatched it back. Achebe caught his wrist. The humor did not come. She said later has arrived. She held his wrist until the smile left his face, then released him and told him to put it down. Back away. He said she's seen him turn a bell into a tactical plan. She said back away. He moved beside the wall. Achebe asked if the name was his. Toby said yes. He had used Route 9 null a long time ago. He didn't know how long. Mira said he knew what the train was. He recognized the route format. He jumped inside before checking whether it would take anyone with him. That was the emergency. Achebe asked what Route 9 null carried. Toby said objects removed from dead cannons. Fragments. Props. Structures that still held usable ink. I asked if removed by the errata. Toby shook his head. Mira asked then who. He said no. Achebe said she remembers things. Achebe asked if he sent the M-dash. He said no. He remembered seeing a younger version of himself at the route controls. A route can show you what it expects, what happened, what almost happened, or what someone wrote into its return memory. Bad evidence. Toby's anger arrived suddenly. It looked more natural on him than the grin. He asked if she thinks he built a train around a man he met 3 days ago, sent part of my sentence into a cannon 6 months before I died. She said the ticket contains his name and he concealed relevant experience. Motive remains unproven. I said I hid the ankle. Toby laughed once and said please don't help. I said I understand why someone might keep something back when they think the institution will. Toby pointed at the ticket. I hid an injury because I was scared. He hid work that got people erased. Those are not the same. I did not answer. Mira asked what kind of work. Toby said routing. Usable pieces from dead cannons. Were they dead before his people arrived? Toby stared at her. That was an answer. Achebe said give her one fact we can test now. Toby said the cargo list should be in the platform clock. Mira turned it over. A narrow metal tongue slid free with rows of stamped numbers. The reader displayed cargo lines. Scene shells, 14. Character remnants, 7. Active law components, 3. Unprocessed narrative mass, 1. Destination, strip floor. That confirmed route knowledge. Toby said it did not confirm the memory. She said she knows. His access was suspended. No route systems, no reconstruction materials, no unsupervised contact with me. The records office had been punishment 3 hours earlier. Now it was something being taken. Temporary secured quarters. Toby said cell. Achebe said room. He said locked. She said yes. He said cell. Toby looked at Mira. She gave him nothing. He looked at me next. I thought of the medical lie, the missing drawer, the fear of becoming an object. I stayed silent. Before Toby crossed the threshold, Achebe asked if Route 9 null stripped my story. He said he never saw my story. Routes under his authorization carried unfinished fantasy material. Constantly. Dragons? He said I was asking the wrong question. Route 9 null did not carry what the crews found after stories died. His voice had lost every trace of performance. It carried what remained after they finished killing them. The officers took him away. Achebe said secure every object recovered from the train, especially the unprocessed mass. From inside the black suitcase, something scratched once, then began cutting through the lid. The medic drove pins through my boot, fitting the boundary splint. 2 dark metal bands linked by 4 thin rods. Whenever the black mark lagged, the rods hummed and forced my outline to wait. It felt like someone pulling my bones backward. The black ring remained behind for 0.3 of a second before the splint dragged it upward. The boundary had moved 4 centimeters toward the knee. I asked what happens if it reaches my chest. She said they stopped calling it an ankle condition. The rods tightened. I could flex my foot halfway. No stairs alone. No active crossings. No removing the splint except under observation. Sleeping, wear it. Bathing, supervised removal. I had concealed progression after a direct medical question. The delay allowed additional boundary migration. Observation housing. My room was now a train. Mira took the splint key. I asked if she's comfortable with this. She said no. I said still taking it. She said yes. The door to the adjacent treatment bay opened. Dorian stood inside wearing a new brace. It covered the gray forearm from wrist to elbow with 3 separate locking bands. A 4th ring crossed his palm, preventing the fingers from closing around an imaginary hilt. His escort sat on another cot. The man had one eye swollen shut and a rigid support around his ribs. Dorian looked at my splint and said subtle. I said he looks worse. He said he knows. The escort was Ivo Pell. He had followed Dorian out and attempted to stop him at the medical stair. According to the corridor damage, the disagreement had become physical. Dorian said Ivo told him to return to medical. He said no. Ivo used the restraint bar. Dorian knocked it aside with his gray hand. The cut severed the stair rail. Ivo fell 1 level. Concussion, 2 fractures. Dorian caught him with his left hand after he hit the landing. No one praised him for that. Medical suspension extended. No weapon access. 2-person escort. Right arm locked except during treatment. Dorian said the hand closes harder when restrained. The gold scar flashed. The brace locked automatically. The room's overhead lamp split. The medic said his arm is attempting to repeat the cut. His body disagreed with his denial. Dorian said he was pressing charges. Ivo said he'd filed an assault report. No anger. No apology. Ivo added that he also filed that Dorian returned after stopping the train and went directly to medical. Because it happened. Mira now held 2 keys. My boundary splint. Dorian's arm brace. She said she was keeping them separate. Dorian almost smiled. Almost. Observation housing. 1 available bed. Private? No. Door? Curtain. Dorian said subtle. The splint locked when I tried to take a normal step. I shortened the stride. It felt ridiculous. Dorian's brace clicked as the gray hand tried to close. We crossed the medical corridor side by side. Neither offered help. Neither walked normally. My new room had 3 walls and a curtain. 6 beds beneath lamps that never fully dimmed. The cot had no desk. Mira placed my canvas bag beneath it. My clothes survived. I asked about my dignity. She said not listed in recovered property. Elias Vance. Provisional existence. Medical observation. Restricted. I said I'm not going to disappear in my sleep. She said she didn't know that. Minimum 3 nights. After that depended on the mark and the discipline review. She makes everything sound like weather. Weather doesn't care whether I lie. The ward gave me a voice recorder that refused fiction. My name is Elias Vance. Accepted. I wrote 31 chapters of a novel about. Restricted content. There was a dragon. Restricted content. A large fictional lizard. Restricted content. I spent 6 hours trying to write 1 sentence. Accepted. I died before I finished it. Accepted. I don't know whether the sentence was mine first. The recorder kept that too. I stopped. Priya examined the burned route ticket under supervision. Leofan remained 2 steps behind. She narrowed her attention. The ticket's history opened in fragments. Toby's hands. An M dash. Then the same images in different orders. Toby inserted the mark after the train incident. Years before. No Toby appeared at all. The object was returning possible ownership states. She couldn't isolate the earliest or identify whether Toby's memory was genuine. Leo said Achabi requested a probability assessment. Priya said she requested evidence. The assessment read, more likely than not, Tobias could directly authorize transfer of the M dash. Priya said delete it. The vision was not reliable. Toby concealed prior work, which made him dishonest, but didn't make every accusation true. She withdrew. Final assessment, inconclusive. Closure is not accuracy. She regretted how polished it sounded. Right, insufficient evidence. Achabi read the assessment later. Priya had declined probability. It may delay a security decision. Achabi said route access for Toby remained suspended. Priya said she did not object. Achabi said no, she objected to certainty. Someone should. Achabi continued walking. Priya followed until they reached the secured quarters. Toby sat behind a clear barrier with no bars and no privacy. A table had been fixed to the floor. His reconstruction maps were gone. He saw Priya and stood. He asked if she read it. She said she tried. He asked and she said she cannot verify the memory. Toby's shoulders lowered a fraction. He asked if she can disprove it. She said no. They looked at each other through the barrier. Priya said Achabi asked for probability. He asked what she gave her. She said nothing useful. Toby smiled. It was small and exhausted. He said thank you. She said she did not do it for him. He said she knows. That answer irritated her. She walked away. After the lights lowered, Toby sat at the fixed table. He had no pen. The surface was soft enough to mark with a fingernail. He scratched one routing symbol into it. A circle broken at the bottom. He stared, then rubbed it out with his sleeve until his knuckles bled. Dorian stood in the aisle wearing the locked brace. He asked if I was writing. Not successfully. Good. I said. Evo filed the report. Medical staff talked through curtains. Dorian looked back and said if they ask whether the train justified it, say no. It didn't happen yet when he hit him. Then he left. I picked up the recorder. I considered describing the exchange. Instead, I deleted every saved sentence. The machine ate the word door first. Brass hooks shot from the black suitcase and tore the engraved plate from the evidence room wall. The letters vanished between rotating metal teeth. The doorway behind the plate forgot what it was. Its frame stretched sideways, flattening into a black line across the wall. 2 records officers were trapped inside the room. The suitcase unfolded. 4 jointed legs punched through its sides. Iron ribs rose from the center, carrying rollers wrapped in blank vellum. Thin cutting arms opened beneath them, each ending in a hooked blade used for separating pages from spines. The evidence alarm started. The machine tore the word alarm from the nearest speaking plate. The sound stopped halfway through its first note. A clerk ran. One hook caught the name badge on her coat. The suitcase became a spider. Brass hooks ripped the engraved plate off the evidence room wall. The doorway forgot what it was, stretching sideways with 2 officers trapped inside. 4 jointed legs punched through the sides, iron ribs with vellum-wrapped rollers, cutting arms ending in hooked blades. A bookbinding machine gone feral. The evidence alarm tried to start. The machine tore alarm off the nearest plate, and the sound died mid-note. A clerk ran. A hook caught her badge, and the letters peeled away. She stopped, staring at the empty badge like her name was a coat she couldn't remember putting back on. Mira reached the corridor first, grabbed the badge, pressed it to the clerk's chest, and said the name from memory. Lena Orr. Recognition returned. Mira told her to run. The machine wrote editable personnel across its vellum. 3 cutting arms attacked. Mira ducked the first. The second shaved her jacket. The third hit her knife, and metal screamed. She cut a cable under the front legs. Black fluid sprayed. The machine kicked back and caught her injured shoulder. She hit the wall. It scuttled toward records, eating words off every plate. Evidence became denke. Names vanished off doors, and people forgot if they could leave. Toby heard it through his barrier. The floor told him the rhythm. He said strip frame, open the barrier. The guard laughed. Then the wall lost secured, and the barrier unlocked. Toby told the guard to have everyone remove name tags. The machine turned the corner. Toby shoved him aside as a hook cut through empty air. He explained it sorted people by labels and ran toward it. The frame recognized him as authorized route technician. He shouted inventory halt in routing shorthand. The frame paused. He told it to return cargo. Authorization incomplete. He said, "You know me." The machine extended a hook and touched his chest. His grin tried to return and failed. He cracked about terrible workplace culture. Letters came out of him. Tobias Quill. The machine pulled. He dropped to one knee. Mira lunged, caught the extraction cable, wrapped it around her forearm. The machine dragged her across the floor with Toby's name stretching between them. Priya arrived. The scene split under her attention. Her editorial contaminant trace appeared on every blade. She spotted the ownership spindle and shouted lower right, behind the third leg. Security officers entered the corridor. The machine consumed security off their uniforms and half lowered their weapons. Achabi told everyone to say their names aloud. The hooks struck toward the sound. Achabi stepped in with a brass staple bar, caught one hook, turned it, drove it into the floor. Told them to advance. They moved as a unit. The machine threw blank vellum across the corridor. Anything it touched lost surface detail. One officer's face started flattening. Priya grabbed him and rattled off his features. They returned. The cutting arm tore medical off the plate. Then it removed Evo's surname. Dorian caught him and said his name. The hook struck the gray tissue, and its blade lost every serial number. Gold flashed across his palm. The invisible edge sliced through the door. The cut severed the frame's second leg. The machine crashed sideways. Dorian stared at the ruined brace and said he hadn't aimed that. My name hung from one hook on the frame. Unprocessed narrative mass. I clipped the cord between the severed leg and two opposing door handles. The machine jerked between them. Dorian moved around the damaged side with an improvised blade. His badge was blank, so the hook hesitated. He drove the blade beneath the roller and cut the ownership spindle free. The machine screamed through every stolen name. Toby's name snapped back, and he collapsed. The machine kept moving on one leg toward me. Strip frames, finish current inventory. Toby said it meant me. The splint locked my foot. I fell. The cutting arm opened above my chest. Priya's attention struck the machine. Editorial contaminant appeared. Every blade turned toward her. She said now. Mira hit it from the side. Achebe drove the staple bar through the feed. Dorian cut the last leg. I pulled the cord and the doors slammed together. The machine folded between them. The main hook struck Priya's shoulder. Priya Odiambo peeled halfway off. I said her name. Mira said it. Then Dorian. Then Toby. Achebe tore the badge from the hook. Priya came back with a gasp. The strip frame had contained 31 chapter tabs. Achebe arranged them on a steel tray. Narrow leather strips, numbers running to 31. No titles. I stood behind a marked line. Achebe asked if I recognized the tabs. My novel had 31 chapters. I didn't recognize the material. Toby said it was binding hide, cheap stuff for low-attention fantasy canons. Achebe opened a second tray with a black scale. The dragon's shadow fell across and stopped. My unfinished opening stopped at the exact place my laptop had. No added city, no remembered name. Just the sentence as I'd left it. The handwriting matched. The chapter count matched. The sentence matched. Enough evidence to avoid lying to me. Toby explained that crews didn't keep chapter divisions. They wanted usable pieces, settings, weapons, characters with audience attachment. I felt sick. What happened to the rest? It depended on what sold. A brass label from the frame's feed housing. Format, serial fiction. State, unfinished. Yield, rejected. The frame found material, but someone decided none was useful. 31 chapters. Years of work reduced to rejected inventory. The M- arrived separately, through route permission. Strip frames don't seed material, they reduce it. Unless someone changed the procedure. A story matching my chapter count and opening entered a stripping process. Before I died, they still knew almost nothing. Achebe said they knew more than yesterday. I hated the accuracy. Evo entered with a medical message. Dorian's brace fitting had failed, the gold scar responding to every restraint. Elias asked if he could see him. Mira said Dorian had said no. Achebe said Toby remained under secured observation until she determined what he concealed versus what he didn't remember. He said that could take years. She said yes. Mira said Elias needed housing. Achebe said he remained in observation. Mira pointed out his room was destroyed because the route targeted him. Achebe said he'd also left against instruction. Mira said he'd have been dragged through the wall. Achebe said both facts remained and settled on 7 nights observation, training suspended. Nobody asked Priya. That absence felt larger than Elias expected. As Toby was escorted out, Elias asked if he'd known about the story before they met. Toby said no. Elias asked if he was sure. Toby looked back and said no. It was the only honest answer available. One strip remained stuck. Chapter 31. A salvage stamp had been pressed into the leather. The date matched Route 9 null. Beneath it, author unavailable. Remove story before completion. The story hadn't been stripped because it was already dead. Someone had acted while I was still writing it. Deep inside the secured evidence level, the black dragon scale tapped once against its sleeve. Like a claw-testing glass. Priya's surname disappeared every time she said it. The plate printed Priya, and an empty space waited. Every reflective surface showed a slightly different woman. One had no face at all. Mira placed a new badge on the table. Priya Odiambo engraved by hand. No ink, plain metal scratched with a tool. Priya asked who made it. Mira said she did. The letters were uneven. She'd had one working shoulder. Priya ran her thumb across the surname. The badge didn't change. Thank you. Mira nodded once. The only kindness either allowed the moment. The recorder said attention assessment was required. Priya's fingers closed around the badge, and she said no. Leo said it was listed. She said her last assessment contaminated objects. He said this used her identity record. She said that was an external object and asked which version. Leo stopped reading. Mira asked what they wanted. Leo said locate her own surname across the registry. Priya laughed rough and said they wanted her to observe the thing observation was damaging. She asked what happened if she made it worse. He said they'd stop. She said he didn't stop the cup test. Mira asked if she could refuse. Priya said refusal extended suspension. Mira said then refuse. Leo said Achabi authorized it. Priya said Mira was her assigned supervisor. Myra's face changed because the authority landed on her. She said she wasn't Priya's supervisor. Priya said she was handling medical decisions, which made her the person standing between Priya and a bad procedure. Leo held out the slate. Mira took it and marked deferred pending stable identity anchor. Leo said it might delay clearance. She said yes. Priya clipped the badge to her shirt. The access sensor stayed red. Mira tried her tag, and the door opened. Priya said she couldn't leave without someone else. Leo said for now. In the corridor, Dorian sat with his gray arm over a molding table while technicians built another brace. Open palm design, the gold scar visible. A technician adjusted the smallest finger. It didn't move. She said attempt extension. He said he was. Nothing happened. She tapped the joint. No reaction. Sensation, pressure, temperature, all no. She asked if he wanted a fourth version and withdrew. Mira asked about the brace. He said terrible. She asked for a medical answer. He said still terrible. The technician said the design avoided scar pressure but didn't stop the invisible cut. Dorian asked for his key. Mira said no. He said good conversation. He saw Priya's badge and said it looked crooked. She said Mira made it. He said that explained it. Mira put treatment orders on his table. Extended suspension, 2 escorts. Officer Pell had requested reassignment. Dorian looked away. His gray fingers attempted to close. The brace stopped them. A white line appeared across the table. Dorian's breathing changed. He said he didn't, and Mira said they knew. The line widened, and the table split. He pulled his left hand across the gray wrist and forced the fingers open. The cut vanished. A technician measured the boundary and said stable, no new spread. He asked for how long. She said they didn't know. He said then stop saying stable. Priya's badge warmed. A new record printed. Priya Odiambo temporary physical anchor accepted. Below it, Odiambo patient location unassigned. The empty bay unlocked. Lights turned on. The bed lowered. A blank chart slid from the wall. Patient Odiambo. Priya stared at the room prepared for the part of her the system had separated. Leo raised his slate. Mira caught his wrist and said wait. Inside the empty bay, the mattress sank as though someone had sat on it. Elias identified Chapter 7 by the coffee stain. The technician placed it under a glass arm and the leather warmed. Confirmed through author memory, partial. Elias asked what else it needed. She said independent continuity. He said he'd written it. She said that confirmed his memory. He asked what confirmed the chapter. She said a surviving location, character, event chain, reader trace, or active rule. The technician wore heavy gloves with wooden joints. No ink in the chamber. Mira stood beside Elias's boundary line. He wasn't permitted within 10 feet. Achabi watched from the far end. The 31 tabs lay in order. The black scale remained sealed under a glass dome. It had stopped tapping after Chapter 25. That didn't make anyone trust it. Chapter 8 had no stain, only a shallow cut. Mira asked what happened in it. Elias said Kalen fought the Ash Wolves. The similarity to Dorian's Kale felt uncomfortable. He explained he'd nearly deleted the chapter because it was bad. The technician said that wasn't a physical event. He said he'd stared at the delete key for 10 minutes and changed one paragraph instead. Deletion pressure confirmed. Mira said you could leave damage without deleting. Elias said apparently. They continued. Chapter 11 reacted to a dead knight's name. Chapter 14 produced the smell of rain. Chapter 20 contained a sword description stolen from a museum catalog. The chamber accepted each detail slowly and rejected several. Elias misremembered which chapter held the first city fire. Chapter 26 did nothing when he described the royal betrayal. He said it was 27. The tab warmed. He laughed and said he'd written the thing and didn't remember it. Achabi said memory wasn't ownership. He said he was learning institutional slogans. Chapter 31 carried the salvage stamp. Author unavailable. Remove story before completion. Elias didn't speak. Mira asked what happened in it. He said the army reached the city. the ashen host, to wake the dragon beneath the palace. Achebe looked toward the scale. Elias said the dragon hadn't appeared yet, only the shadow. The technician asked if the scale was described. He said no, just smoke, heat, wings and clouds. Not until the sentence that killed him. He corrected himself to the sentence he was writing when he died. The technician lowered the glass arm over chapter 31. The tab rose and floated toward the scale. Every security brace locked. Mira caught Elias before he stepped forward. He said he wasn't moving. She said he'd leaned. He said that wasn't illegal yet. The tab struck the dome. The glass rang. The scale turned and one line appeared. Chapter 31, Body Incomplete. The technician backed away. Achebe said explain. She said she couldn't. Achebe said she worked there. She said that didn't grant prophecy. The tab hit the dome again. Elias's splint tightened. He sat before the rods forced him down. Achebe activated a brass shutter. Before it closed, the technician saw something and said wait. She rotated the dome. 5 tiny impressions marked the scale, like fingerprints from lines too fine for fingers. Reader traces. Elias counted 5. The technician confirmed 5 independent witness impressions. He said he'd had for regular readers. She said page visits weren't always witnesses. He said one might have been his alternate account. Mira asked if he read his own chapters from another account. He said marketing. She said that wasn't marketing. He said it was morale management. Achebe asked if they could compare them with Elias. Mira said consent. Elias held out his hand. The scanner took his thumb pattern, pulse residue, ink signature, and narrative pressure. 1 trace lit. Match, Elias Vance. He shut his eyes. The technician examined the other 4. 3 corresponded to public attention marks. Achebe asked about the 5th. She said hidden access. Elias asked what that meant. She said the reader observed without registering through the normal audience structure. He asked if stories could do that. She said people could. Toby's voice came through the speaker. He said they were assuming it was a person. Achebe said he'd been asked about salvage procedure. He said he was expanding professionally. Mira asked what rejected yield meant. Toby said the story resisted separation. Strip crews priced pieces. If taking one damaged everything around it, the yield became expensive. Elias said rejected. Toby said the machine decided it wasn't worth the effort. The distinction hurt more than expected. Achebe asked why retain the materials. Toby said pending disposal, or someone might have another use. She asked about the scale. He said he didn't know. Mira said he'd told them the frames killed stories. He said yes. She asked if his was alive. He didn't answer. The scale struck the dome again. The brass shutter dropped. The chapter tab remained outside, hovering. Then the other 30 rose. They aligned from 1 to 31 in a curve above the table. A spine without a body. Each strip turned toward Elias. The technician whispered it was attempting bookmark compression. Elias asked what a bookmark was. The first tab folded around an invisible vertebra. She said a rule that survived its story. The second followed. Then the third. He asked if that was good. Nobody answered before the black scale punched through the brass shutter and attached itself to the forming spine. Something huge took its first breath inside the evidence room. The dragon built its head from the walls. Stone plates tore inward around the black scale. Brass pipes bent into jaws. Evidence cabinets flattened into teeth. Its neck formed around 31 chapter tabs, each becoming a separate spine. It had no body below the neck, so it made one. A wing erupted through the ceiling. The second punched through the records corridor. Workers scattered beneath falling doors. Mira dragged Elias behind the boundary barrier. She said stay inside the line. He said it was his story. She said it had just eaten a wall. He said that didn't answer her. She said it answered enough. Achebe drove a staple through the lower jaw into the floor. The head stopped 6 inches from the technician. Its teeth kept growing. She ordered evacuation, spoken identification only. Officers tore nameplates from doors and shouted room purposes. The dragon inhaled. Black text gathered behind its teeth. Elias recognized the opening sentence and said cover your ears. The dragon spoke. The dragon's shadow fell across and everything after became available. The sentence seized evidence from the floor and completed itself. Every sealed object opened. A jar released 3 years of rain. A sword bundle tore free. A child's crown screamed for a dead queen. The chamber collapsed into overlapping story fragments. Rain flooded one side. A throne room appeared. 6 silver birds attacked the nearest light. Mira pushed Elias under the table and asked if he still thought the line was optional. He said no. She said good. The dragon tore the staple free and swung toward medical, toward Priya's name anchor. It smelled unfinished identity. Mira said Dorian's bay and ran. Elias grabbed her jacket. She said it was the plan he had. She pulled free. He stayed behind the barrier. It felt terrible. Achebe climbed onto the neck while officers held the jaw with cables. She drove a second staple between chapters 12 and 13. A forest burst from the gap. Black trees grew across the ceiling. Ash wolves dropped among the officers. Dorian met the first wolf in the medical corridor with his open palm brace. 2 escorts behind him, one holding a restraint bar. The wolf leapt. He caught the bar with his left hand. White light formed. Short blade. He cut through the front legs. It rose on wooden stumps. One escort said it was a physical scene remnant. Dorian drove the blade through the coffee-stained mark. The wolf came apart into lines from chapter 7. A second landed behind him. His gray hand closed against the brace. The stops held. An invisible cut opened sideways, missed the wolf, and split the wall beside Priya's room. The medic called brace pressure rising. Dorian said he knew. The gold scar glowed. Mira entered through the rain and said left hand only. He said he was. She said his right was cutting the building. He said tell it. The dragon's head forced into the corridor. Towers from Elias's city rose along its back. 31 spines burned beneath them. Priya stood in her doorway. Her badge had started lifting. The dragon looked at her and failed to decide what it saw. Priya. Odiambo. Editorial contaminant. Unassigned patient. The labels crawled across its eyes. It struck at all of them. Mira tackled Priya aside. The teeth removed the treatment room door. Leo ran after them with a recording slate. Priya said stop recording and help. He said he could do both. She said he was doing neither. He threw the slate into the dragon's mouth. It bit down. Every assessment record burst into the air. Priya's cup test became 3 enormous white vessels. 1 water. 1 dormant ink. 1 warmed when anyone lied. The third turned red. Everyone noticed. Dorian cut the first cup before it crushed the medics. Mira kicked the second under the dragon's jaw. Dormant ink spilled across its teeth. She shouted now. Achebe dropped from the neck and drove a staple through the solidified jaw. The dragon slammed into the floor. The medical level shook. Toby felt the impact and told the guard the dragon was using strip assembly. The guard said he couldn't see it. Toby said he could hear 31 bindings grinding against 1 claim cut. He told the guard to call Achebe and say the spines were original material, but everything else was theft. He said if it reached a complete body, it would route itself to the nearest accepted story. The dragon opened a wing. Every feather carried a stolen sentence. Mira heard the message. Original spine. Stolen body. Priya wiped blood and said remove everything except the tabs and scale. Dorian looked at the size and said simple. She asked if she'd said simple. The dragon pulled the first staple free. Its head turned toward Elias. Author located. Mira told him to make distance. He limped as the splint allowed. The dragon drove through the evidence corridor. Achebe ordered everyone clear. Mira ran along the left side cutting cables. Dorian followed with the restraint bar blade. The dragon crossed the examination room. The boundary line lit. Unauthorized witness. The dragon struck the barrier. Steel folded. Elias fell. The splint locked his foot. The dragon caught him around the waist, teeth closing on his jacket. It pulled. The splint held. His body stretched between the creature and the ankle mark. He screamed. Mira reached the head too late. The dragon tore him free. The splint rod snapped. His ankle ring remained behind the line. Elias rose in its jaws while his right leg faded from the knee down. The dragon opened its wings. Across 31 spines, his unfinished chapters wrote a final sentence. Author present. Completion may proceed. Toby shouted through the speakers not to let Elias finish the sentence. The dragon carried him through the records corridor with his lower leg dissolving. Mira asked what happened if he did. Toby said the story got a body. Mira said it already had one. Toby said that body belonged to the building. The dragon's wing tore through a maintenance hall, growing larger with every room. Elias clung to a metal tooth. His foot was a pale absence, and the blank climbed toward his knee. The dragon spoke into his ribs. The dragon's shadow fell across and waited. Elias knew the rhythm. He'd tried dozens of endings before the heart attack. City, army, palace. None felt right. Now each word appeared as a physical place. A burning city under the wing. An army across the ceiling. A palace upside down. Any word he chose would become material. He shut his mouth. The dragon bit harder. Mira climbed onto its neck and drove her knife beneath Chapter 20. A sword longer than the corridor burst from the dragon's side. She flattened against the spine as it passed. Dorian asked if it was a bad chapter. She said stolen description. He said he liked the sword. Dorian cut the sword's shadow where it crossed the floor. His white blade broke. The weapon fell and smashed through the dragon's shoulder, pinning one wing. Officers threw cables around the exposed spine. Chapter tabs opened along the neck, releasing scenes. Ash wolves. A burning bridge. A coronation hall. Officers vanished into scenes and returned with injuries from events Elias barely remembered writing. Priya's badge read only Priya now. She was asked where the original scale was. Her attention reached, and the suspension seals burned. 31 tabs, one scale, hundreds of stolen pieces. The body rearranged every time she tried to separate them. She said she couldn't read it directly. Leo said the head avoided its own reflection in the rain. She looked. Rain from the evidence jar fell through one side. Every stolen object reflected clearly except the black scale. It appeared as a hole near the throat. She said under the jaw. Mira crawled along the spine. The dragon shook and she lost her knife. Her injured shoulder hit a brass ridge. Pain dropped her to one arm. Dorian saw her slide and threw the restraint bar. She caught it and wedged it between two spines. Dorian was unarmed. His gray hand closed against the brace. The invisible edge formed a circle through the floor. Achebe warned him. He said he knew. Mira hung beneath the neck. Dorian raised his left hand around an imaginary hilt. The right copied, delayed. The edge aligned with the wing joint. He shouted move. She released the bar and dropped. He cut. The edge passed through the wing and Chapter 19. A city district vanished. The shock threw him against the wall. His brace broke and the gray boundary climbed toward his elbow. Mira landed badly and didn't rise. The wing crashed. Achebe's cables tightened. She said pull. Officers dragged the head down. Its jaws opened and Elias fell. His leg had almost disappeared. Priya stepped under him and caught his shoulders. Both went down. The dragon snapped at them. Leo threw himself between the teeth and Priya's badge. A fawn caught his jacket and lifted him. He tore it open and dropped free. The dragon swallowed the garment, and its throat filled with assessment records. For 1 second, every stolen part received a label. Wing, errata architecture. Jaw, evidence cabinet. Spine, original chapter bindings. Core, black scale. Toby shouted about a bookmark press. Achebe said evidence level 3. He said too far. Mira said the portable unit was destroyed by the train. Toby said use the strip frame feed. Achebe said it was destroyed. He said the rollers were destroyed but the claim housing survived, in medical evidence lock. The dragon spoke again and Elias's unfinished city spread through the corridor. Red towers replaced walls. Faceless people ran through streets, ending in blank paper. The dragon needed one word. Elias said he couldn't feel his foot. Priya said the mark was still in the evidence room. He asked if they could bring it. She said moving it without the limb might widen the separation. He said that sounded bad. She said it was. Toby told Elias to listen. Elias said he was busy. Toby said the removal order created an unresolved claim. They were told to remove the story before completion, but never completed the removal. Achebe said it was a pending continuation. Officers returned with the claim housing, a metal box with one surviving roller and a narrow slot. Toby said feed Chapter 1 first, then the final tab. Don't feed the middle until the claim opens. Mira climbed onto the pinned wing and tore Chapter 1 free. The dragon screamed. A childhood village appeared beneath her. She threw the tab to Achebe. Dorian dragged himself upright and climbed the opposite side with only his left hand. His gray arm hung open, the brace gone. Mira told him to stay back. He said he needed Chapter 31. He reached the final spine. The dragon twisted toward him. He let the gray hand close. The cut formed sideways. He used it to sever the ridge beneath his own body and fell with Chapter 31 under his arm. Achebe caught the tab. She fed Chapter 1 into the housing. The roller turned. Nothing. Chapter 31 followed. The machine choked. The salvage order appeared. Author unavailable. Remove story before completion. Toby shouted now the middle. Officers ripped tabs from the spine while the dragon thrashed. Each removed chapter destroyed a piece of its body. They fed them in one after another. The roller compressed them into a black strip. The dragon shrank. Its stolen rooms fell away. The machine stopped before chapter 31 disappeared. Continuation requires claimant. Achebe said he was medically unstable, under writing restriction, and the object was linked to his blank injury. The dragon tore the final cable. Priya's surname vanished entirely. Dorian's right hand closed, and an invisible edge cut beside Myra's neck. She froze. He forced the fingers open and said decide faster. Achebe said if he claimed it, they didn't know what followed. Mira said if he didn't, they did. Achebe gave Elias one order. One sentence. He crawled toward the machine. His missing foot dragged through the unfinished street. The dragon lowered its head. The black scale watched him like an eye. He thought of 31 chapters. For readers, his false view count. Years pretending he didn't care. He thought of old Kale beneath the well. He'd called himself unfinished as though it meant the same for everyone. It didn't. This story was his. That didn't mean he owned every person it had become. He placed one hand on the housing. The machine waited. He looked at the dragon and said, "You don't get to finish it for me." Chapter 1 and 31 closed around it. The middle tab supplied history. Toby's instructions reversed the strip claim. Priya identified the core without touching it. Dorian cut away the stolen body. Mira kept it pinned long enough for the choice to matter. Achebe released the housing. The black scale tore from the dragon's throat and entered the slot. The machine slammed shut. Every red tower vanished. The dragon collapsed into black letters, striking Elias from all sides. The ankle mark returned and wrapped around his leg. Pain restored the missing foot. He screamed. The housing opened. Inside lay a narrow black leather strip. One scale formed its upper edge. 31 faint ridges ran down its length. Sequel clause. Status, dormant. The dragon was gone. So were the 31 tabs. Achebe stared at the empty trays. The strongest proof of his story had been compressed into one object now linked to him. Mira asked the cost. The housing printed source material, irrecoverable in original form. Elias reached for the strip. Achebe caught his wrist and said he didn't touch it unsupervised. He said it was his. She said yes. That frightened him more than refusal. The sequel clause lifted from the machine and pressed against his sternum. His ink signature split around it. A black bookmark-shaped mark appeared beneath his skin. The leather strip fell into Achebe's hand. Every door connected to his registration unlocked for 1 second. Then all of them slammed shut. Elias wrote his name under supervision. The pen was chained to the table. Mira held his splint key. Achebe stood beside the sealed sequel clause case. A clerk watched through glass. Nobody congratulated him. Achebe said only the registration line. Don't add punctuation. He said he understood. His hand shook. The last thing he'd tried to write before dying had followed him into the blank, entered another story, injured Dorian, exposed Toby's past, and built a dragon from the Errata's walls. Now he was trusted with 12 letters. Elias Vance. The first stroke felt ordinary. That nearly broke him. He completed the surname and lifted the nib before the final line could become anything else. The record accepted it. Proofreader candidate. Active under restriction. Bookmark count 1. The case opened. The black strip lay inside with 31 ridges. The scale at its tip reflected no light. Achebe said it wasn't a weapon. He said he knew. She said he didn't know what it was. He said a bookmark. She said he knew its category. A bookmark preserved one rule, clause, or unfinished function from a canon. Most were granted after controlled extraction. His had formed from damaged evidence during an emergency. He asked if this was a normal first week. She said no. He asked what the sequel clause did. She said currently nothing. He said comforting. She said it was dormant and they hadn't tested conditions, range, or cost. He asked if he could carry it. She said no. He asked why they counted it as his. She said because it refused every other registration. The clerk tried it against neutral storage and it darkened. Against Achebe's tag it produced a warning. Against Myra's it stayed inert. When Elias touched the glass the ridges warmed. His writing restriction was modified. He could complete approved forms on sealed surfaces. No fiction. No unsupervised sentences. No contact between written material and the bookmark. He said that was barely writing. She said yes. He looked at his name on the registration line. More than yesterday. Less than before he died. Both facts stayed. Mira sat across from him in a harder shoulder brace. She said observation housing remained 7 nights. He asked if his bed survived. She said the dragon didn't reach medical observation. He said the train did. She said different room. He asked for a desk. She said no. He said cruel. She said he'd used the last one as a train destination. He said that wasn't his design. She said still no. He asked about Priya's access. Mira said Leo carried the temporary anchor release because Priya chose him. Elias was surprised. Mira said Priya wanted someone whose job depended on recording when he was wrong. He asked how she was. Mira said still herself. He said that wasn't medical. She said it was what she'd allowed. In the identity ward, Priya stood between 2 beds. One belonged to Priya, the other to Odhimbo. The empty mattress continued registering weight during stress. Leo sat beside it reading her surname aloud every hour. The room sensor recognized the full name for 3 seconds, then split it again. Priya wore Myra's engraved badge against her skin. The letters stopped fading after she chose Leo as temporary observer. It was humiliating. It also worked better than pretending she needed no one. She chose 3 witnesses for her identity anchor. They had to state her full name, 1 verified memory, and 1 current disagreement. Agreement could be rehearsed. Mira arrived first. Priya Odhimbo. The gate printed both words. Verified memory. Priya broke her nose during close quarters certification. Disagreement. She stepped into the throw. Mira threw before the signal. Priya was slow. The gate accepted it. Leo went second. The blinking misconduct accusation. Accepted. She chose archivist Senka from her early field years. Senka arrived with a lunch bowl, looking older, 1 thumb replaced by a wooden joint. She said Priya only called when systems were failing. Senka stated the full name. The gate printed it without separating them. Verified memory. Priya abandoned her in a cannon for 19 minutes. Disagreement. Senka expected disobedience. Priya said she ranked lower. Accepted. The surname remained attached. The patient classification Odhimbo didn't appear separately. Stabilized. Temporary. She asked Mira if she'd approved this. Mira said she'd approved Priya having options. Priya said she'd become comfortable deciding for people. Mira said she'd made Mira responsible because she was angry. Mira said she was still responsible. Neither moved toward apology. Senka finished her lunch and said they both sounded tired. Stop trying to win a conversation nobody scored. She didn't enter records. She asked about reserve assessment. She looked through the gate at her old access corridor. The life she'd built before Elias. She marked field suspension voluntarily extended. Until she could inspect 1 object without changing the answer. Her readings were wrong. Leo wrote exactly that. Her full name printed for 7 seconds. Then Odhimbo flickered. She pressed the badge against her chest. The name steadied. She'd chosen not to use Elias as an anchor. That didn't mean she'd stopped thinking about why. Dorian was ordered to repair the wall he'd nearly cut through. Discipline wanted visible consequence. Medical wanted controlled left-hand use. Facilities wanted the wall fixed. He stood beneath the white scar with a mortar bucket. Evo was working with the repair crew, ribs still bound. Dorian hated that more than if Evo had stayed away. The worker handed him a trowel. His left hand knew swords, doors, ropes, impact. It didn't know how to smooth a wall. The first layer fell onto his boots. Evo asked if he had advice. Dorian said keep it. He worked for 20 minutes. The patch looked terrible. The corridor no longer had a hole. That counted. Evo carried a replacement rail. Dorian offered to take it. Evo said Dorian had 1 arm. Dorian said Evo had broken ribs. Evo said then neither of them should. Workers took the rail. They stood empty-handed. Nobody turned it into reconciliation. At the report station, Dorian took the chain stylus. I used force before the alarm reached the stair. The sentence was ugly. It remained true. Officer Pell attempted to stop me under active medical order. Evo said he could stop. Dorian's shoulder was shaking from forcing unfamiliar control. He needed to finish. Evo said he could finish tomorrow. Dorian said he wouldn't. Evo said that was why he'd blocked the stair. The gray fingers pushed against the brace. The gold scar brightened. A white line appeared across the incident plate. Dorian stepped away. The invisible cut sharpened toward the newly fitted stair rail. His body had remembered. He turned toward the mortar patch. The wall split open again. Mortar exploded across the corridor. Blood ran from beneath the nail support where he'd torn his own finger. He couldn't feel that either. Dorian said add it to the form. The gray boundary hadn't spread. Damage didn't require pain. Evo signed the witness section. No embellishment. No omission. Dorian finished the statement. That belief did not give me the right to use him as an obstacle. Evo didn't forgive him. He signed beneath it. Accountability acknowledged. Consequence pending. Dorian looked at the repaired wall he'd cut open again and said fair. His gray hand closed inside the restraint. This time no blade formed. That frightened him more. Achabi made Toby rebuild a routing switch. 3 pieces missing. No maps, no writing tools. Just a guy behind a transparent partition with a tray of numbered components and a shoulder that still remembered getting his name dragged through his chest. He fitted the gear into the housing. Missing spring. He bent a strip of plain metal into one with his thumbs, hands shaking. The strip frame hook had pulled his name through his chest, and he kept pausing mid-breath like he was checking whether Tobias' quill was still attached. Mira said what everyone was thinking. He'd known the frame would recognize him. He'd used the emergency to make himself necessary. He'd withheld the only information that could stop the machine until he was standing in front of it. She said he'd worked with people who price characters. The smile vanished. The switch turned once. A metal flag rose with 4 lines. Sender, route, destination, recipient. And a 5th, residual claimant. If cargo was removed, but someone still held a claim, the route kept a 5th line. Achabi placed the routing tooth from the platform clock in the 5th groove. 5 lines lit up. Sender withheld. Route 9 null. Destination strip floor. Return claimant active. Source ASH, 31. My story. Failed heroic fantasy. Their term. The claimant dial showed authorization mismatch. Toby had used the route, not authorized it. Same name on the ticket. Still not the same. Achabi pushed the cart toward the door. The cart crossed the threshold, and the switch clicked. Return claimant present. Toby was still inside the partition. The message stayed lit. Toby was not the active claimant. Whoever it was someone else. There was a claimant out there, and it wasn't Toby. The first controlled bookmark assessment used a stone table, a pen with no removable parts, and 7 people prepared to tackle Elias. Mira counted them out loud. Achabi, herself, Leo, 2 medical officers, 1 containment officer, 1 records technician. Elias pointed out that was 6. She said she counted herself. He said he was honored. She said he shouldn't be. Elias sat at the center of the testing chamber in a replacement boundary splint, rods reaching halfway to his knee because the blank mark had migrated upward. Beyond arm's reach, a sealed glass case held the sequel clause. The black bookmark stayed dormant, 31 ridges across the leather. 5 reader traces hovered above the case. For stayed still. The 5th waited at chapter 10. Toby's voice came through a secure speaker. He said to please avoid turning the room into a dragon. Achabi said technical comments only. He said that was technical. Priya watched from behind a second partition, total attention sealed, observing with ordinary sight only. Elias looked at her. She didn't look back. Mira placed 1 page on the stone table and said this wasn't an invitation to continue the story. He could write 1 verified factual statement about chapter 10. Elias said he didn't remember chapter 10. Mira said that was part of the test. He asked what happened if he was wrong. Achabi said they stopped. He asked before or after the wall grew teeth. She said write slowly. Elias picked up the pen. The technician told him to state the memory before writing. Chapter 10. Kalen had reached the western road. Or maybe that was 9. Chapter 10 opened with rain. No, 14 smelled like rain. He remembered staring at the title because it sounded better than the content. Mira asked what the title was, then clarified it was a factual prompt. He said after the gates. The 5th reader moved. Chapter 10 to 11. Toby said it was listening. The technician confirmed movement after the spoken title. Elias wrote that chapter 10 was titled after the gates. The sentence stayed. The sequel clause warmed. No dragon appeared. Then the 5th reader moved backward. 11 to 10. Toby said it disagreed. Elias said that was the title. Priya asked if he was sure. He said yes. She didn't accept confidence as evidence. Elias searched the memory again. The chapter list on his old laptop. 9 was the western road. 10 was before the gates. 11 was after the gates. He'd been wrong. He crossed out after. The pen stopped at the first stroke. The testing page vibrated. Correction requested. Achebe's hand moved toward the staple bar. Mira told Elias not to continue. The fifth reader stayed at 10. The sealed case clicked. A narrow image appeared inside the glass. A road under black rain. A closed city gate in the distance. No people, no dragon. Just the scene as Elias had meant to write it. The technician whispered reference image. Toby said no. Achebe asked him to explain. Toby said that wasn't a reader opening the chapter. It was a comparison system. Elias realized the fifth trace was checking him against something. Mira asked if he could correct the sentence. Achebe checked with the containment officers. Both nodded. She said proceed. Elias wrote before the gates. The wrong words faded. The scene inside the glass sharpened. The closed gate gained iron bands. A torn banner moved in the rain. The fifth reader advanced to 11. The chamber stayed intact. The technician said comparison accepted. Elias said someone had kept a copy. Toby answered too quickly with maybe. Elias asked what else could compare the memory. Toby listed options. Elias asked which one. Toby said he didn't know. Elias asked Achebe if they could ask it. She said no. He said that seemed unnecessarily passive. She said he'd produced one correct title, and that was the full approved test. Then the page beneath his hand moved. The inked title sank through the stone. Containment officers stepped forward. A second line printed beneath the table. The technician knelt. Claimant verification in progress. The fifth reader trace turned toward Elias. The bookmark marked beneath his sternum burned. The page printed another line. Current authorial sample, incomplete. Elias asked sample of what? Toby didn't answer. Achebe said terminate assessment. The containment officer closed the stone page inside a metal sleeve. The sequel clause case went dark. The fifth trace stayed, turned toward Elias. Mira unlocked the testing chair. Elias didn't stand. He looked at the corrected title. Before the gates. The hidden process had known his chapter better than he did. He asked if the fifth reader had ever been a person. Achebe said unknown. Toby spoke, voice low. A reader follows a story because they want to know what happens. The fifth trace pulsed once. A claimant reads to prove it belongs to them. The trace had been comparing every chapter against a record. Checking the story. Checking Elias. The final line appeared inside the sealed sleeve. Authorial claim, not yet accepted. Elias's first ordinary duty started with a carpenter refusing to let him carry a door. The last door near him had become part of a train. Elias got the hinges instead. They sat in a canvas sack with replacement handles, screws, and blank brass plates. The bag dragged against his boundary splint every time he took too long a step. Facilities had reopened the central route through the Areta. The reopened meant workers had painted a red path around missing walls and marked unstable sections with chairs. No signs. The strip frame had eaten too many labels. Staff stood at intersections announcing destinations out loud. Don't use the left stair unless you enjoy falling through records east. Elias followed the carpenter along the red line. His splint clicked with every sixth step. People heard him coming. Junior proofreaders stopped talking when he passed. A records worker moved her coffee to the opposite side of the corridor. Another woman gave him a short nod. 3 parallel scars crossed her forehead where the dragon's chapter scenes had struck her. He remembered her being dragged through the burning bridge from chapter 18. She remembered him too. Neither spoke. The carpenter stopped outside an opening covered with gray fabric. It used to be claims reception. The room beyond had 2 floors occupying the same space. A clerk on the lower level passed documents upward to a desk hanging from the ceiling. Every time someone entered without stating which office they wanted, gravity chose at random. Facilities had tied 3 workers to the wall. The carpenter fitted the new frame. Elias handed him screws one at a time. He wasn't permitted to handle the engraved plates because his writing privileges had been suspended again. 3 days. Myra's wording was shorter. You drew it on purpose. Not entirely. That was the problem. A review officer had placed the recovered desk screw in his palm and asked if he'd intended to draw it. Yes, intended to complete it. He didn't know. They asked whether he'd felt compelled. He said yes, then corrected himself. He'd wanted to do it. Something had made the wanting feel urgent. Could he have stopped? Mira had stopped him. That wasn't the question. Elias said he hadn't. The report classified it as mixed intent. Deliberate testing, emotional compulsion, possible external reinforcement. No single explanation excused the others. The carpenter finished the upper hinge and asked for a plate. Elias opened the sack, stopped before touching the brass, and called for the facility's engraver. The engraver stamped each letter physically. No ink, no responsive script. The plate went above the door. The room settled into one orientation. The ceiling desk dropped 4 inches. The clerk swore as her papers slid. They continued through the damaged headquarters. The assessment corridor still smelled of rain. 3 offices had become portions of his abandoned city. Facilities had sealed them behind brick. Staff called the area the Red Rooms. The training floor was still short a wall Dorian had repaired badly and cut open again. Elias carried hinges. He held ladders. At lunch, the scarred records worker ate beside him and asked about Chapter 18. The bridge. She asked if he'd written the soldiers beneath it. He said yes. She said her leg broke there. She asked if the bridge was always on fire. He said no, it caught during the battle. She said good. She'd spent 2 days wondering whether he'd designed a burning bridge for atmosphere. He said he wasn't that bad. She said she might have been exactly that bad. After lunch, the route passed his former housing corridor. The train engine had destroyed most of room 18. Elias stopped behind the safety line. The missing drawer screw sat in an evidence pouch around his neck. Mira had required him to carry it during ordinary duty. Exposure without writing access. It felt like punishment because it was. The urge came when he saw the screw holes in the surviving desk leg. One horizontal mark. Short. Incomplete. His right index finger moved against his thigh. No pen, no chalk, nothing to draw with. He pressed the hand into his pocket. The urgency rose. Not a voice, not a command. Just a belief that one small dash would answer something. The carpenter called from the far corridor, asking if he was stuck. Elias said yes. Physically. No. Then hurry up. Elias walked away. The urge weakened. He reported it to the medical grill before he could reconsider. Mira arrived 20 minutes later. She asked if it was the claimant. He said he didn't know. Was it him? Yes. Both. Probably. She wrote the report herself. His writing suspension stayed. At the end of the shift, facilities carried the final replacement door toward a corridor Elias had never used. The new brass plate rested against the wood. Claimant intake. Elias asked when that office had been approved. The carpenter said today. Elias asked who needed it. The carpenter adjusted the weight on his shoulder. Senka took Priya back to the stair where she'd abandoned her. The cannon was gone. Only its extracted stair remained, fixed inside the lower archive as evidence. It rose 14 steps and stopped beneath a painted sky. Priya stood at the bottom. Senka climbed halfway, using her wooden thumb to steady herself. She said Priya had left from here. Priya said Senka had told her to. Priya said she kept saying abandoned. Senka said it made the record inaccurate. Senka said that was why they were here. Leofan waited near the archive gate. He'd been chosen to confirm Priya's name, not follow every conversation. The gate displayed her full name. Stable. For now. Senka placed her lunch bowl on the 9th step and asked if Priya remembered the report. Priya recited it. Collapsed transit structure. 2 trapped personnel, 1 exit route. Senka said 3. Me, you, and Nail. Priya said Nail was local support. Senka said Nail was a person. The report didn't treat him like one. Priya climbed the 1st step. The stair vibrated beneath her boot. Stone breaking. A painted sky folding into the walls. Senka holding a support beam while Priya ran toward the crossing. A young local porter beneath the lower landing. Nail. Priya remembered his face. She didn't remember him leaving. She asked what happened to him. Senka said that was the reason she'd stopped answering Priya's letters. Priya said she'd sent 3. Senka said she'd sent 7. Senka scraped food from the side of her bowl and said Priya had returned with a brace after 19 minutes and extracted her. The report listed no local casualties. Priya said she hadn't written that section. Senka said she'd signed it. Priya said she'd had a concussion. Senka said she'd lost a thumb. That wasn't a competition. Senka said no, she'd won. Priya climbed higher. On the 8th step, her surname flickered. Leo said Odiambo. It steadied. Senka didn't repeat it. Priya pointed out she was one of her anchors. Senka said she was also at lunch. Priya stopped beside her. Senka's wooden thumb had been carved with tiny archive numbers. Priya asked what she wanted. Senka said the original field strip reopened. For Nail. And Esrin. Priya frowned. Who was Esrin? Second porter. Priya said no. Senka said that was what the report said. She remembered too. Priya reached for total attention. The suspension seals burned beneath her sleeves. She stopped before the ability opened. Leo saw the movement, but didn't record it. Senka said she couldn't be checked. Not safely. Priya said that wasn't good. Senka said it was for this conversation. Priya sat on the step below her and asked why now. Senka said because Priya's name had started falling out of the registry. Records were only as permanent as the people permitted to correct them. Priya said she could have filed without her. Senka said she had. They cited Priya's signed report. The old commendation had advanced her career. Successful emergency extraction, rapid field judgment. No local casualties. If Senka was right, the commendation stood on missing people. Priya said if she reopened it, they might suspend the award. Senka said she'd assumed Priya would survive. They might review her conduct. Priya asked if she'd expected immediate agreement. Senka said she'd expected Priya to become defensive. Priya almost laughed. It hurt her ribs. Senka slid a metal record strip across the stair. Request for historical correction. Priya could sign. She read the request. It didn't accuse her of murder. Personnel accounts conflicted regarding the number of local support workers present during the Kestrel stair collapse. The official record might be incomplete. Independent inquiry requested. Priya took the stylus. Her surname flickered at the gate. This time Senka said it. Odiambo. Priya signed. The stairs shook. A loose stone beneath the seventh step opened. Inside lay a small brass name tag. Nail. No tag for Esrin. Senka said she'd put it there before extraction. Priya asked if she'd hidden evidence. Senka said she'd preserved a name after Priya's team began sealing the cannon. She hadn't trusted the report. There was no clean side to stand on. Leo approached after the tag was placed in an archive sleeve. He asked if the identity procedure required adding Senka's historical dispute. Priya said no. Senka said yes. Senka didn't want her witness statement treated as proof that she and Priya trusted each other. Priya told Leo to record that. He did. The archive gate displayed her full name. Priya watched Senka carry the tag toward processing. She said Senka had remembered 2 porters. Senka stopped. Yes. Priya asked why preserve only Nail's name. Senka said because she'd remembered Esrin after Priya's name split. Priya felt cold. She asked if Senka thought her injury had created the memory. Senka said Priya's injury had made her question which record had been deciding what she remembered. Priya said that wasn't evidence. Senka said no. Senka continued toward the desk and said that was why she needed Priya alive, suspended, and annoyed.